playing in an infinite game in a finite planet is in itself fundamentally a problem. It didn't appear to be a problem when it started. The fact that the market was now programming the consumers fundamentally changed the nature of the game. When I'm growing wheat and you're growing wine, we both want bread and wine. Trade between us is utterly natural and benign and makes us both better off. But if I can beam messages into your brain saying that you need pink sunglasses and sparkly flip-flops, suddenly we have a totally different kind of market.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Win-Win Podcast. As you know, this podcast is all about how do we change the game? And I'm so stoked, therefore, to be speaking to today's guest, Jim Rutt. Jim is a longtime technologist. He was actually one of the early pioneers of the internet. He's also been the chairman of the Santa Fe Institute, which is kind of the number one place on earth to study complexity and systems design. Even cooler, he is one of the co-founders of something called the Game B movement, which is trying to explore the very difficult question of how do we level up our civilization away from these old school zero-sum status game type dynamics that are kind of unsustainable into a new, strictly win-winny paradigm. And this movement has actually been very influential on my own thinking and has partially inspired this podcast in the first place. So I'm so excited to share this conversation with you all because, Jim is one of the wisest, funniest, and most interesting people I have ever met. So on that note, here is my conversation with Jim Rutt. So Jim, to get us started, you have, or at least last I checked, you had become my hero because you are one of the only people I know on earth who has managed to transition from using a smartphone to a flip phone, which is something I have aspired to do as someone with a very incredibly deep smartphone addiction that makes me miserable. So that was in 2019. You wrote that you were transitioning to one.
Right.
Are you still a flip phone person?
I know you're going to disrespect me. It lasted 6 months.
No!
And I can tell you what the downfall was. In that article, I did say I was going to put my smartphone on the shelf for traveling because I couldn't live without Uber, right? And so we went on a trip and I picked up the smartphone and that was that.
What? Okay, so what went wrong?
The goddamn things are so addictive, so useful, and so handy. And so all the things I wrote in that essay are indeed true, and they sucked me back in. And I will say, I do occasionally say I should do it again, and I could do it. I got a pretty strong will. I could at least do it for 6 months, but I haven't. Right? Just like, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'll never drink again. Right? How many times people have said that, right? Mm-hmm. So, I hate to disappoint you, but it lasted 6 months.
Have you tried the kind of grayscale on the phone version?
Or the brick or something like that? No, exactly. I have not. I will say I am quite aware of technical addiction and have what I'd call reasonably good tech hygiene. Try to avoid bringing your phone into your bedroom, or if you do, put it in the bathroom. I have all my devices have notifications turned off. I preferentially use web desktops rather than apps. Mm-hmm. I always say the apps root the internet. The empire struck back, basically, because apps are not open while the web is.
Have you found any particular techniques that have stuck with you? Because one of the things you have talked about is that you will take sometimes 3 or 4 months off of social media.
Stick with that one. 6 months a year, I am off Facebook and Twitter. From July 1st to January 2nd. And this most recent turn was 6 years. I've been doing that without fail. And I did sneak back for a couple of days around the election, and that was it. And I actually started that routine like 15 years ago. My longest term online community is a thing called The Well, which is this very interesting old line. I would sometimes joke and say it's the Colonial Williamsburg of the internet. Half the users are still using the command line version.
Oh, damn.
And the web version dates from about 1997, and it's like a 1997 website, basically. When the community started in 1985, it was a spinoff of the Whole Earth Review, that, hippie magazine and the Whole Earth catalog and all that. And I'm still a member of that, actually, still engaged it. But 15 years ago, I started taking what I called sabbaticals. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it'd be 3 or 4 months, sometimes it'd be a year and a half. I just, and when I come back, it's exactly the same.
So what do you notice in that time that changes in terms of your day-to-day? Like, do you notice something about your attention span changing? Do you notice something about the effects of dopamine?
I also probably have a somewhat unusual usage pattern in that I'm much more of a writer than I am a reader. I don't, death scroll on the things. I post something provocative, come back tomorrow and see what somebody said, and then bang people's heads together and make them be sensible, right? Or not. And so I tend to use it that way more. And my downfall and what is so freeing is, and this was true on the well even 15 years ago, is if I'm engaged in a serious conversation or argument, my background brain is processing constantly. And instead of thinking grand thoughts about how to save the world, I'm thinking about how to make X look like a fool about topic Y, which is a complete waste of time, right? And so that is the most liberating thing from my sabbaticals. No more background processing on how to win internet flame wars, right? And then, of course, just the time. When I'm probably spending 45 minutes a day on average, 30 to 45 minutes a day. And 30 to 45 minutes a day, a lot of time, right? And so I feel great. And then inevitably now, since I've been doing this Facebook, Twitter sabbatical, by about the 1st of June, I'm going, God damn it, July, when are you going to come here so I can get off of this stuff? Kind of feel like Frodo halfway to Mordor, right? Actually in Mordor, halfway to Mount Doom, right? The weight of this thing, it's just dragging me down. And of course you could say, well, you can quit anytime you want. And I go, Frodo couldn't throw the ring away in the end, right?
You need a Gollum to bite your finger off.
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to look for basically with my smartphone. Most of my smartphone addiction is social media. So it seems like you, and I don't know if that was also one of your motivations to try and get rid of a smartphone.
It actually was triggered, as it said in the article, but I got an Apple Watch. And goddamn thing was so annoying, was beeping all the time, and stand up. I go, I'm a fat motherfucker. I don't want to stand up, right? I assume cussing's okay on your
That's fine. Anything goes.
It's too much work. And then it was like beep this, do that. Oh, you haven't done your second circle, blah blah blah. And I took the damn thing and put it in my sock drawer and never saw it again. And that got me thinking about how these things were making us dance.
Right.
And then I went and did a long dive of research, which I document in the article, and I said, whoa. These things are not just annoying, they are dangerous and addictive, and for exactly the same reason slot machines are addicting, right?
Intermittent reward.
Yeah, classic intermittent reward, dopamine drip. It's pretty much exactly what the psychology rat torturers learned 30 years ago, right? And interesting side tale. One of my business buddies left the company we were both at and became the COO of the third biggest slot machine company. It was headquartered in Vegas. And when next time I was in Vegas, he and I went out and had a somewhat liquid dinner and talked about how were things in the slot machine business. He said, "Oh yeah, we're the third biggest, and we have 200 PhD psychologists, most of them graduates of the rat torturing division of psychology, and the big guys have over 1,000." And so those things are literally scientifically designed intermittent reinforcement dopamine drips. And as I referenced in that essay, at the time I wrote it, 2019, I did a search of the Facebook job board for the word psychology. Of the jobs listed on the opened on the public Facebook job board, 700 of them had the word psychology in them.
Really crazy. Did you feel any conflict with that friend, knowing that they've basically put their one life into creating such an addictive technology with, in this case, slot machines?
Well, I got to say,
and on top of it, take 200 psychologists that could have otherwise did something else with
something
their
meaningful.
wealth of knowledge.
And done something purely extractive.
This is the odd thing about my career is I've often say on my podcast, yeah, I was certainly a game A motherfucker, right? And so was he. And we were all just game A motherfuckers. And you played the game as hard as you could. And, you responded to local signals, right? You climbed the local gradient. You didn't think globally at all. You played the finite game, not the infinite game. And that's just what we did. And it was kind of cool that they had 200 guys. And said, what a good way to fuck people over and addict them to slot machines, right? It also explained to me why my mother and all of her sisters absolutely love slot machines. These Midwestern gals who are quite tough, self-sufficient people, particularly after their husbands died. They love to go out to the casino and play the slot machines.
Explain that to me, because it's a phenomenon that's basically a meme that we've all observed, and
we're poker players, so
we've been to Vegas multiple times.
Right, we spend a lot of time in casinos, and I have no interest. I walk past the slot machines, and I'm like, that looks like death to me.
Yeah, so tell me, why is it that specifically that kind of profile you described?
Yeah, well, first let me step back a minute and have my own take on slot machines, which is. When I was in business, we'd often go out to Vegas for conferences and stuff like that. And my rule of thumb was before I went, I bought a roll of quarters. When the roll of quarters was done, so was I, with respect to any gambling in Vegas, until later I developed a moderate poker habit, but I was especially good at it as long as I didn't accidentally sit down at a table with a pro, which I did once, got my ass whipped, but the education was well worth $800 to be applied elsewhere. But against the average fish, I could make money. But anyway, I would often describe my visceral psychological reaction to a slot machine. It'd be like sticking your face in a disc sander. It's just going to gradually run you down. It's designed to gradually run you down. And if you played, having a mathematical bent, you always think of a math series going to infinity. What happens? The grinders ground all the way to your brain. You're dead, right? And so it never had any visceral appeal to me. But watching my mother and her sister and another person who I will not even provide any indirect vector to, another addict, they literally respond to the sounds, the beeps, the payoffs, and just like rats in a maze, There's a reason the sounds are what they are. Those, in fact, just like ABCD testing of internet ads, the rat torturers back at HQ are running constant tests on those things, and it's finely tuned to people who are not able to or choose not to. My mother, a very smart person, actually, but she chose to put herself in the reference frame of the game to be titillated perfectly by the machines.
But why not? I always see the slot machines as shitty video games that cost you much more per unit time than why not play a better video game that?
Okay, they're not. The payoff is
like Candy Crush.
Yeah, the payoff is. Is the dopamine reinforcer, right? So that's you got to have that.
And you get like a physical. I mean, you can even have the money come out the machine.
Yeah,
right?
the old school. They don't do that anymore.
No,
so like a proper game like that, like Last of Us, or just many other games have just much slower rewards. Well, Polytopia is kind of in between, right? Where each click is actually also designed such that it does give you a bit of reward. Mm-hmm. So I suppose, and then if you go to Candy Crush, you're already pretty close to slot machine.
Well, I can address that indirectly. My mother was, after my father died, I will say she's very disciplined, never spent any significant money. I managed her money. She never took a single penny out of capital. So whatever was left over from my father's pension check sometimes would go to the slot machines, but I didn't give a shit. So I went to, hey, Ma, how about I buy you 2 slot machines and put them in your living room? And she goes, that would be no fun because there's no loss possible, right? And I said, how about if I took the money? And he goes, well, that would only be 2 machines, and I want a variety of machines. And so the fact that you had skin in the game was essential, right? If son James would come and open the slot machine once a year, take all the quarters out and dump them on her kitchen table, that took all the fun out of it, right? Uh-huh. And also she wants variety, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 machines isn't enough. But of course, like all these people, they have their favorites. They can sense this machine's hot right now, right? Which we all know is complete bogus BS. But when you're in the reference frame that is designed for, it's all very real to you. And she's, bright enough to understand that, I think, although I've never had that precise conversation. But, as we know, people vary in where they are in mental hierarchical complexity. And if you're in the lower ranks of hierarchical complexity, those games are real to you. And those things directly hook into the things you were evolved to do, not get eaten by a tiger and to find yourself a rabbit to club to death, right, basically.
At what point did you then decide okay, that's not the type of technology I want to be involved in. I want to have responsibility in what I build.
Someone asked me this the other night, and I actually have a relatively crisp answer. And it was when I was absolutely in the belly of the beast. My career was about half entrepreneurial and then half big corporate. Until 1992, I did startups. After 92, I was a corporate dude until I retired in 2001. And 94, I was a mid-level executive for what's now Thomson Reuters. It was the Thomson part in those days. It was an $8 billion company, 50,000 employees, pretty big company. And I was a mid-level executive. I was a chief operating officer for 6 business units. And, mid-level game A motherfucker, but of the corporate variety. And I got involved on the well in one of the forums called Sustainability. And for this first time, I'd really paid much attention to the bigger question of man and the ecosystem. I mean, yes, I had gone to Earth Day a few times and stuff, and was generally aware of questions about the population bomb. Remember, I read that book, but I would say it was not the kind of science I had typically been focused on. But about 6 months of this conversation with people who were absolutely earnest, and some of those Whole Earth Review people were serious movers and shakers. Kevin Kelly and Paul Hawkins, these people like that were around the well in those days. And I said, God damn it. I didn't have the words for it quite then, but what I was sensing was, wait a minute, playing a game of infinite exponential growth on a finite planet? That's fucked. That can't work. And then I said, well, why? And then I had the big breakthrough, also late 1994. All this happened in 1 year. I had this just epiphany that the market is one of the greatest inventions that humanity ever made. As we were talking about at lunch, the market is vastly superior to the force that was basically what ran the world prior to modernism. Think of it as feudalism or kings or nobility or whatever. Somebody with a knife or a sword or an arrow, or more likely their henchmen that'll beat your ass if you don't do what they tell you. The market, we all participate in it voluntarily, et cetera. All good, right? I love me my Adam Smith, my Irving Fisher. It all makes good sense. However, in around 1925, a guy named Bernays, who was Freud's son-in-law, wrote a book called Propaganda. And he was the first person to apply science to persuasion. And that became the basis for the advertising industry. During my research, I'm always a compulsive researcher, jump into rabbit holes and go as far as I can go. I go, this guy Bernays, I forget his first name, who was Freud's son-in-law, wrote a book called Propaganda, I think it was, in the 1920s, where he essentially applied the science of psychology to the art of persuasion. And he essentially invented advertising, public relations, all this stuff. And of course, they didn't adopt it instantly, but before long, it diffused throughout the economy. And I realized that is what had gone wrong. That was the first thing that had gone wrong. Well, not the first. The fact that you're playing in an infinite game in a finite planet is in itself fundamentally a problem. And we'll get back to why it didn't appear to be a problem when it started. But the fact that the market was now programming the consumers fundamentally changed the nature of the game. When I'm growing wheat and you're growing wine, and we both want bread and wine, trade between us is utterly natural and benign and makes us both better off. But if I can beam messages into your brain saying that you need pink sunglasses and sparkly flip-flops, right? Even though you don't need pink sunglasses and sparkly flip-flops, suddenly we have a totally different kind of market. And starting off at around that time, the market went nuts and was able to program its own customers. Instead of serving the needs of the customers, legitimate needs of the customers, it manufactured needs. And in fact, you start reading the books about advertising from the 50s, and I've read a few, they actually talk about manufacturing need. The famous example being deodorant. No one knew that stinking was bad until someone convinced them that it was, right? And deodorant's a relatively new phenomena. Now we got vaginal deodorant, asshole deodorant, God knows what, right? But
how do you split between kind of manufactured need versus truly like an innovative solution to a problem that wasn't beforehand seen as a problem but can be actually solved?
And of course that's the wonderful thing about technology, right? Probably the greatest, one of the greatest human inventions was the wheelbarrow, for instance, right? Prior to that, the rate at which you could do construction was gated by how much dirt you could carry on a pole over your shoulder. The wheelbarrow, which I believe was invented by the Chinese, massively increased the rate at which you could do construction. So there was a real problem, the amount of weight of dirt that a person could carry per unit of time, and the wheelbarrow was a huge innovation for that. I'd say the railroad. Would you rather take a train across the country or be in a wagon train for 3 months and have a chance of being caught in the Donner Pass and have to eat the other members of the wagon train? So those are real solutions, and notice that many of them were prior to 1930, right? These real solutions. Not to say we don't also still have real solutions. One of my favorites, and don't need any advertising to sell this, is the electric power drill, right? I'm old enough to remember the hand crank drill before we had power drills, but they were expensive and heavy and all that stuff. Just often we use the hand crank one for small jobs. Now, of course, we all got the power drill, and the Makita power drill, thing of great beauty, great engineering, and it's great. So I would say that many of the things that we have are indeed solutions to real world problems. But of course, the other part, and this we've always had with us, we can't blame this one on Bernays. Humans have always played status games, right? And take status games plus Bernays now, however, we can psychologically program each other to play the status games that the money wants us to play, right? And when I say the money, I literally mean the money as an egregore, essentially, what some people in the liminal world would call mammon, right? The three monsters, Moloch, Mammon, and we added the third one recently, Hypnos.
I haven't heard of Hypnos.
Yeah, this is one that my co-author and I, working on our Game B book, came up with. We actually surveyed some people. We did some research of mythology. Hypnos is a relatively minor Greek god of imparting beliefs into people while they're asleep, essentially. And so what are all the things that ain't so that we think are, right? And so
the god of psyops, basically.
Yeah, essentially. But the egregore style psyop space, there isn't a little dude in a room saying, let's fuck everybody over.
It's not human mediated.
Right.
It's almost like it's an emergent property that's like a psychofauna that runs on sort of.
And all three of them, the inner loop is the money on money return, right? The signal that comes out of the short-term money on money return, call it 3 to 5 years, essentially is the coordination mechanism, the signaling modality that all three of the adverse gods of the modern system respond to and are fed by, right? If I'm a good spreader of status symbol ideas, right, like that drinking Bud Light will get you laid or something, right? Then I can make a lot of money doing that as an advertising executive or owner of a beer company or even the owner of a local beer distributor.
I mean, at the same time, in this case, it might even become true, right? If enough people believe that drinking Bud Light gets you laid and you see someone drinking Bud Light, you assume that they will be, that kind of reinforces it and it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
It could be sexually suggestive to a female, she sees it.
Though I agree, it touches on this thing that Liv and I have once drawn up on a whiteboard where I kind of have which is probably an existing theory, just like rephrased, but on the advertisement point, I feel like they're basically like what does the market try to do? It's via the mechanism of money. It's aggregate. It's a very good system to aggregate a lot of information via the method of pricing things, which then allows for this information to like flow and without actors having to collaborate knowingly or anything like that, right?
That's the core transactional value of money.
Right. That's what that's when it functions well. And this is why it's so better than any previous system. It was just better at aggregating this information about real needs. But I think the question is about like, what is this information that it aggregates, right? And when you add advertisement to it, where beforehand, someone's desire to purchase something freely and non-coercedly means that this fulfills various needs that they have. Once you add advertisement, then basically their willingness to buy is now not only mediated by need, but also by kind of like all of these other dynamics that were added to it. And now the market actually starts aggregating across some domains, not what is useful, good, whatever, to the purchaser, but it also aggregates just what will they buy in the short term quickly.
And which is profitable. This is why I always
which
say
is profitable.
You have to understand that it's not just Moloch and Mammon and Hypnos. It's also the inner money on money return loop, right? Because if you can, convince you that standing on your head will get you laid, no one's going to fund the propagation of the message standing on your head will get you laid because there's no money in it, right?
Yeah. There are some things which these are a good business, these are a bad business.
Yeah. And so
that
and
also
that's
matters.
the first cut.
Right.
So, I mean, having been involved in early stage companies and financing early stage companies and all that, that's the first cut. Okay, it's a good idea, but who will pay for it?
Right.
And what would it cost to supply? And is it likely to be profitable at scale? And if the answer is no, you just don't even think anymore about it, right? It's the first money on money return is the ultimate god. It's the Zeus of the gods.
Because it's a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, and it feeds all the others and powers them up, right? If
compound interest is like one of the biggest kind of like amazing things that everyone wants to
Yes, famously
realize.
Einstein said, okay, relativity was the most amazing idea you ever had. What's the second most amazing idea in the world? And he said, definitely compound interest.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that I realized is if it's this kind of delta in information that the user has or customer has is key, then according to that, basically markets should work better in situations where what the user actually more often buys the thing that is also fulfilling the needs that they have. And I think that's actually kind of the case. So, and it depends on feedback loops and like transparency into what they're buying. So then the example of, I think the market works amazingly for TVs, for example. Like TVs become cheaper quickly, people get much better, like how much cheaper TVs have become is incredible, right? And the customer can just very clearly see it. Similar with cars also, like the customer can evaluate things. There are certain things where the customer has no ability to evaluate it, like diet, for example. Very, very hard. We have no information. And that's a great spot for advertisement to come in. That would be at least like one theory to have, basically. Like the more delta there is in the ability for the customer to evaluate the product, the more space there is for the advertiser and the less market systems work.
Well, it's more specifically, it's this decoupling between what the consumer actually wants and what the consumer actually needs.
Yeah,
right?
and let me speak specifically to your two examples, because actually that's quite interesting. Because at one level, the TVs right now are almost purely on a utility curve, right? What features do I get at what price and how big? However, when I was a kid, TVs were huge status symbols, right? They came in these big, fancy furniture consoles, and they basically sucked and were unreliable. And we never even had a color TV in our house till I went off to college, right? And having a color TV was a status symbol. And having one of these big console things, we never had one of those either. We just had a TV sat on a table. And so the status game should not be underestimated. And of course, there's always status games with humans. People say, Game B's trying to get rid of status games. I go, no, we're not fools. Humans will always want to distinguish themselves, but why let the money on money return machine define what the status games are? And so TVs used to be a status game, not much anymore. Mm-hmm. Nobody really gives a fuck what brand of TV you have, right? Even in the double aughts, if you had a Sony TV, that was considered cooler than any other TV, and people, you got a Sony, that's cool, right? Well, now I couldn't even tell you what even TV I've got, nobody cares. Cars, though, are still quite the status game, right? Mm-hmm. Why in the world would somebody buy a Range Rover, for instance, right? Or my favorite pet peeve is the G-Wagon. the Mercedes piece of shit that costs $150,000. What they really ought to do is just get a tattoo on the forehead. I am a douchebag, and it would have the same effect essentially. And there's absolutely no rational reason anyone would own either of those two cars. And they're not better than cars at half the price at any of the missions that they can fulfill, but they're a status symbol. And in fact, I talked to one of my best friends who's involved in the Game B movement. I like to tease him a little bit about this. People say, well, how do you know when we're in Game B? And I say, when you drive up in your Porsche, we'll all laugh at you, right? And so these, in part, at the low end of the car market, I think you're right. It's, you buy a $16,000 Kia versus a $16,000 Hyundai or a $17,000 Toyota. It's pretty much features, price, size, whatever. But you get much above that, and it's accepted, which is a biological term for taking something that existed for other biological reasons and using it for other purposes. You've accepted the status game. And as it turns out, there's almost no profit in those little cars, but there's huge profit in the status cars. They don't cost that much more to make, and they sell for like 6 times as much. You don't have to be a genius to realize that. Or, Porsche is worth more than Volkswagen, right? Things like that. How could that be, right? Because it's so much more profitable. So only well-articulated PR, advertising, et cetera, maintains the fact that a Volkswagen with a little shield on the front and a little faster motor, a little better suspension and stuff, but basically the same vehicle, sells for 2.5 times the price. So I would say TVs have made the transition from being a huge status game. In fact, just having a TV just before my time was a big status symbol. I was born in 53, and I sure don't remember the world much before, say, 56. But say in the early 50s, just having a TV was a status symbol. And the kind of TV you had was probably a status symbol up till the double aughts, but now it isn't.
I'm trying to think if I was like, I don't know, I'm not a teenager anymore, but we used to care about who had, sadly, we used to care about who had what phone.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that it's less about what the phones are physically, and it's more about what apps do you have. It feels like the status games have fully switched into the digital realm.
I would again claim that according to this, I would expect it to be more useful and better for that the market would provide better phones because the user can just very quickly evaluate the value to them.
Right, there's a type.
So it's very hard to play a strong advertisement status games when it's abundant as well. So probably when they're rare, you can play the game
that's
better.
The false scarcity game. If I were the dictator of the world for a week, which would be a good idea, I would get rid of the whole luxury goods industry. If there's anything more revolting than people spending $1,000 on a purse or $250 on a scarf because it's got a brand on it, but it's interesting about the phones because there's the watches is probably the most disgusting of all these luxury games. The $20,000 watch, and it's interesting. And I've mentioned this before with people. Why isn't there a Rolex of phones? It's interesting because you can ascertain the value of a watch just fine. It's actually easier to understand than a smartphone, and yet there's the status game of watches. For a long time, on principle, I wore a Timex for $23. Had the Indigo Timex that had a little light on it. You go like that, right? And now I have to wear an Apple Watch because I can monitor heart rate and stuff like that with it. But I certainly would never be sucked into the game of paying $20,000 for a watch. And yet that is a huge industry. And so I'm not quite sure how we square that circle, that there is no Rolex of phones, which is odd in some ways, but there is the Rolex of watches.
I mean, maybe just because there could be, but watches came before phones when the status game around them was just one of the games that you could play, right? There weren't many options basically especially for a man to show kind of anything is kind of restrict because men don't have handbags. It's restricted to watches and glasses. Usually, you can have very fancy glasses, you can have very fancy watches,
and
but
shoes,
otherwise
and shoes.
Shoes, but otherwise, clothes. Men don't play those games very much. I think the watch market is very man heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there are fancy lady watches too.
There it is, but usually
No,
like
girls
whenever
do
you
handbags.
yeah.
Handbags or
and
shoes.
of course the whole
yeah.
clothes thing, right?
And jewelry.
Right.
Men don't do jewelry much. Men usually
Well,
do
that's what-
watches.
no, that is
it's the
that is
jewelry
it.
of the
Yeah,
man.
totally.
Yeah. So that's why I wonder. It's okay. They could have now moved 2 phones, but now you're starting a whole new thing, whereas it's much easier to maintain
It may have been a founder-
pre-existing system.
It may have been a founder effect too. People like Jobs, despite the fact that he was a sociopath, was also a pretty strong egalitarian, right? He thought that what he was doing was bringing power tools to everybody. And so he may have forbidden, playing the status game with Apple, because there was certainly a period when the iPhone was a status symbol itself compared to what were those little thingies, the Blackberries, right? That if you look at people with Blackberries, you go, ew, right? Teenage girls would do that, right? And then there was a bit less of that, but still some with the early Androids, which were pretty cruddy actually, and it may have been that Jobs forbid playing the status game with iPhones.
Also, it's actually been embraced by, I think, by the people that the idea that Bill Gates has the same phone as you is a thing that has been mentioned more often, and it's kind of like celebrated as a good thing about what we have.
But I'll bet Bill Gates doesn't wear the same watch that
Right.
the dude in the Walmart shopping center shopping parking lot is wearing. So it's just interesting. No obvious reason. And if anything, the phone is more flashy, right? You're pulling it out all the time.
Yeah.
Right? If I was going to think, a priori about what would be a wonderful status symbol, the phone would be it. And yet, for whatever reason, it didn't happen.
Well, I think it's partly because the status games have switched into how many numbers you have on social media. They've become fully digital.
So we should keep in mind that while we're all very online, that's only 1% of people that give a shit about the number of likes and followers and all that sort of crap.
I completely disagree.
You think?
Completely. 1%? No way.
I mean,
maybe it's 1% of boomers.
Yeah, maybe of your generation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because when I talk to some of my friends, they go, "What's Twitter?"
Right. No, the generational gap. Whereas, like in
Mr.
Gen
Beast
Z,
has like 3% of the world are following Mr. Beast.
exactly.
Just one
In
guy.
Gen Z, it's almost entirely about that.
Yeah,
like it's
I
the
have
number
heard-
one job.
Yeah,
desired job
it's number
is-
2 after medical doctor.
Is it really?
Medical
Medical
doctor
doctor
is
is
number
back?
is 1, and influencer is number 2, I believe.
I would bet against that. All the studies
I'm
I've
not going
seen.
to bet against you.
All the studies I've seen
Do
is
I look
that-
like a fool?
At
As
least
I
in
remember
Western
it,
Gen Z.
your generation as a child wanted to be number 1, an astronaut.
Yep.
And nowadays it's unfortunately very much.
It was
not that.
astronaut number 1, fireman number 2, and policeman number 3.
Which is also funny because it's actually the time when you can become an astronaut. It's actually feasible. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, well, wait a minute. If I'm talking to Liv here, I got to have a wager, right? So I'll wager you a dinner that the most recent polling will show that it is medical doctor or that it is not influencer.
okay,
I'm
but
not
which demographic and where? Which location?
We're only looking at Gen Z or Gen Alpha.
Is it in America or
Let's
where?
say American 18-year-olds,
American 18
16 to 18-year-olds.
Number one job.
Okay.
Sure.
And we'll
I don't know if we
take
can
the
find the
average
data.
of 3 polls that we see as the top results.
That'll be fun.
What are we wagering?
A dinner.
Dinner. Fine. Deal.
Gambling with Liv ain't going higher than that.
No, I mean I'm not that. I'm like 60%.
Yeah,
No, that's good. It makes it a fair bet.
I'm
Exactly.
probably
It's-
about 50-50, 51,
Exactly. So
49.
it's reasonable. I don't have any like big insider
Liv
knowledge.
and I
there.
usually, instead of wagering money, we wager units of personal assistant time against each other. So then you have to do labor for the other, which
Mostly on
works
backgammon.
really well.
He owes me about 5 hours. It's great.
I've put in quite a bit of work for you, actually.
Okay,
She's
so
whipping your ass.
Unfortunately, I've put in work willingly rather than sometimes just every time tracking it and reducing.
That's because you're
my
not a
debt.
game A motherfucker. And marriage, this is important. Families have always been game B, right?
Yeah.
right. Well, okay. So before we go any further, can you give your definition of game A versus game B?
Yeah, let's say game A is the status quo. It's the game that when you walk outside your house, you are playing. It's what I call late stage modernism. It includes market economies, particularly highly financialized market economies, typically democracy, certainly strong technological base, and all driven by this inner loop of money on money return that we talked about. with some adverse effects, such as multipolar traps, which we sometimes call Moloch. The being driven by money, including at the personal level, which we call mammon, and the belief of things that were manufactured for us to believe, which we call hypnosis or hypnosis. What the hell did I pronounce it? Game B is a proposed, very rough sketch of an alternative social operating system for the human race. So very modest proposal here, right? That would literally rethink how we relate to each other at every scale and apply some of the same kinds of ways we deal with each other in the family and the way we deal with each other with our friendships and the way humans live for 290,000 years as foragers. But updated and modernized to take advantage of the most cutting edge technology and actually drive technology further so that we're not caught in win-lose type situations. We're not caught in multipolar traps where we'd all like to not do X, but we're forced to do X, often by one bad actor, sometimes by no bad actors, by random fluctuations. The stupid story I give, I don't even know if the underlying premise is true, but let's imagine it's 1975, there's 5 soft drink companies, right? They're all using cane sugar to sweeten their soft drink. But one of the guys decides, there's money to be made by replacing the cane sugar with corn syrup, right? And so he does. And guess what? The consumers can't tell the difference. Evil genius, right? And the other guys go, that's kind of a shitty thing to do. Corn syrup's worse for you. I don't know if it is or isn't, but people think it is. And guess what? Because the other guy's profit margin goes up, his stock price goes up, his market share starts to go up because he can undercut the other guys in price. Everybody else has to get rid of corn, cane sugar and replace it with corn syrup, even though they didn't want to. In the Game B world, the soda people would have what we call an accord, which we all agree, quality soda is made with corn syrup, with sugar cane. And yes, innovation can occur, but we're not going to adopt innovations until we all agree that they're good, omni-considerate, and not just for us and not just for the industry, but for our customer and for society at large. And that's just a very small, homey example, but apply that from the bottom up to the whole world, and that is Game B. Other aspect of differentiation, as we talked about earlier, Game A is completely dominated by this inner loop of money on money return. And let me say, we're not saying we should get rid of the market, but it's the big problem with it. It's a single dimension. And it's only a signal on a single dimension. And most of the world's interesting problems are high dimensional. A nice simple example. Should I give it? One of the ones I like a lot because it's highly tangible. Imagine bluefish, which kind of fish that is common where I live in the ocean and the bays and stuff. People like it. Some people like it, some people don't, which is important actually. And there's a biologically sustainable number of bluefish that can be harvested each year and maintain a healthy population. Today, it has to be enforced, if it's enforced at all, by complicated and onerous government regulations and all this sort of stuff. People cheat and this kind of thing. In the Game B world, we would add a second dimension called the bluefish coin. The people that live in the area where bluefish are harvested would hire a biologist or a couple of biologists, ascertain the sustainable limit. Let's say it's 40 million pounds of bluefish per year, probably using a blockchain. We'd mint 40 million bluefish coins, and we'd then distribute them per capita to the inhabitants of that bioregion, right? Turns out a lot of them don't like bluefish. It's a strong, oily fish. I happen to like it. A lot of people don't. So there would be automated trading agents, which would then, you just put a check mark on your inventory and say, no, I don't want a stinking bluefish, right? Just liquidate them for maybe money or at least some other intermediate good. And the automated trading agent would basically get rid of the things you don't want, buy the things you do want. And we then have a closed system, a closure on the system, so that the only 40 million pounds of bluefish could be transacted. So when I buy a pound of bluefish, not only do I have to bring the dollar price, I also have to bring 1 pound worth of bluefish coins. And so you increase that to 1,000 different things, various woods, oil, CO2, and you have many dimensions that are controlling the transactions, not just one. Then you can shape a world that doesn't just run crazily and destroying the world.
This is a way of managing common public goods, essentially. Or
that's one piece of it.
Well, it also sounds like the thing that it relies on very heavily in this world, in this case, is what is the assumption of the experts, biologists that you brought on that about how many bluefish can be sustainably farmed, right? And that would then also exist within how much oil can we extract per year, et cetera. Yeah. It's, those are definitely interesting questions, right? And there is a question of like how to imbue this information into
the transactions,
into the transactions
without regulation.
But there is the issue, for example, with something like energy. It does strongly depend on what can you do with it on the other side, right? Like it's not like it's a 0-1 issue where we can extract easily this many barrels of oil, and then if we do even 1 barrel more, now the whole thing, we're on a bad path. So it's kind of like a gradual trade-off rather, and there needs to be something on the other side that argues for a little bit more oil will actually do us mighty good because this will ensure national security for whatever reason or something. How does that interact with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd call it the top-level governance issue. Not entirely clear yet. And it is important to note that Game B is a work in progress, and we probably have better thinking about things up to the bioregional level rather than particularly say that's a very good question. But we do believe it has to be addressed at the global level, right? Whatever energy policy, or more specifically, using the atmosphere as a dump. We don't care about energy, right? Use all the energy you want, right? So long as it isn't, raising the climate, polluting the atmosphere. So fusion power, more power to you, right? Fission power, more power to you. Though there will presumably be some form of market-driven cost to disposing of radioactive waste from nuclear power plants. That would be explicit in another token, most likely. So this is kind of what I'd call the transactional monetary signaling part. But there's another even more important part of Game B, and it turns out that it applies to Game A as well. And that is any civilization, it has two things going on. It has lots more than two things, but two key things. One is what are the capacity of the people, the citizens, and the other are what are the institutions at any given time. And then, this is more important, what are the trajectories of the capacities of the humans and the nature of the institutions? And our analysis says that for a while, maybe since Bernays, but certainly since 1975, the institutions in Game A have actually been degrading the quality of the humans, right? Think about our politics. I point this out regularly. In 1964, first time I paid the interest in politics, the less than 50% of Americans above 25 were high school graduates. 9% had 4-year college degrees. And yet our politics was pretty sane. Got things done, put men on the moon, We did some stupid shit like Vietnam War. Oh, well, we recovered from that pretty quickly. Built the interstate highway system. Our governance actually worked pretty well with people without much education. Today, 92% have high school degrees, 36% have 4-year college degrees, and we have an insane shit show for politics, right? So we have actually degraded the capacity of our humans to do collective sense making because our institutions have also devolved. And further, it's a spiral. As the human capacity goes down, the quality of the institutions that you can build goes down, and those institutions will probably make the people worse. And so you get a downward spiral. And we'd say late stage Game A, at least since 75, and probably since 25, has been on a downward spiral of institutions and human capacity. So the core way that call it the design value for designing the Game A pieces is we have to reverse that spiral. We have to increase human capacity. And this is something I've learned by dealing with the hippy-dippy community. The fair amount of people in and around Game B, the hippy-dippy, meditators, all that shit, right? I don't do that stuff. I'm a good old redneck, basically, and a retired Game A motherfucker. So, I don't do that stuff. But anyway, a lot of them do. And but I see them go out for a 42-day retreat or something, right? And they come back and they're all very serene and nice and all's well. And then 6 months later, they're still doing all the bad shit again. And I actually watched that and thought about it a fair bit. That makes perfect sense because you come back into institutions that are not scaffolding the change. That's the words we now use. And if we had a world where your institution scaffolded the good change that you made to yourself, then they're more likely to stick. And oh, by the way, if you have a community of people who've all undergone some sensible, well thought out, not too woo-woo transformation, and have more human capacity, essentially, we can now build new institutions for ourselves that will scaffold us and even elevate us to the next level, or provide a reasonable path to the next level that's worth doing, because it'll be scaffolded. So this is utterly core to the idea of Game B. So now you say, wait a minute, isn't that a crazy dream? How the hell are you going to have that happen on a worldwide scale tomorrow afternoon? The answer is you can't. And so Game B is also realized, and I will say this from the beginning, that it has to start tiny and local. And language we now use is membranes. We build membranes, and a membrane's biological term, one of the uses things like the cell walls, a classic example. And the key thing about a membrane is it's semi-permeable. Some things come through, some things go out. Some things are ejected. The cell ejects the toxins, right? And the cell could eject the sociopaths, for instance. It makes some things internally, it brings things in from the outside. And so we think of a Game B, the actual game of Game B, once it starts being played, is being played initially as membranes that are curated by people who want to live a certain way, who scaffold themselves, who choose the kind of personal change that they want to make with each other, non-coercively, and build the institutions and the personal change up and up and up. And then the membranes communicate to each other with protocols, and some membranes are contained within other membranes. In fact, eventually all membranes are contained within the master membrane. And this is a way that Game B could actually be played at relatively strong sauce, as our friend Jordan Hall says, and yet be embedded in the belly of the beast.
I think before we justify the specific structure of Game B much more, let's bring it back a bit to Game A, and because you were the chairman of the Santa Fe Institute, so you know your complex system science,
right?
And I think it's also the complex adaptive system lens that is used quite a lot in these evaluations of the different systems, right? And I think it's a great lens that it's worth discussing. Even though one comment is, I think the Game A and B moniker, I'm not a fan of the term, and in part also because it invokes kind of as if A was the first game that is being played. It's actually not, right? Beforehand there was Proto-A and Proto-A, etc. And actually Game A was already an improvement on Proto-A in part. So we're actually in a chain of continuing, improving, and the civilization finding new games.
And forking, all kinds of things.
And forking, yeah. And we had a different game, and then French Revolution came, they wanted a different game, etc. Right? And you're kind of suggesting, let's have another, because maybe this current version is coming to a point where it needs changing, or else it will potentially self-destruct. Yep. So I want to talk more to the point of, or hear you rather talk to the point of, why is it that not just there can be found just a few points of change within Game A, such that it does not self-destruct?
There are some people around or who have previously been part of the Game A world who do think that the top-down method of a few changes will save the day. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it. I believe that the Game A is a highly evolved beast that runs on the money-on-money loop and now has been ramified via advanced finance. And an example, the debt crisis may be one of the ways that crashes the system. There's just so many ways that the system is wrongly constructed and self-reinforcing. Consider climate, right? We all know that's one of the boundary conditions. Where it is arguable. Some of the climate activists are over claiming the levels of risk, but it's definitely real. As a science person, I can show you the physical chemistry that will show you that you add a certain amount of CO2 to the atmosphere, the retained heat will continue to go up. Now, how much damage that will do, that's also arguable. But it is certainly a dangerous thing to do essentially. We just elected somebody who believes that climate change is a hoax, right?
He was a little bit amenable, actually, in one conversation by hearing that if you increase the CO2 in a room to a certain level,
plants will grow better.
Well, but also
cognitive abilities go down.
That cognitive abilities go down. You get a headache. It's unpleasant. That he didn't like.
Okay, that he didn't like. But here we are, collective sense making in the most powerful country in the history of the world. that has the best universities in the world, that invented the internet, that has written most of the software of the world, and our collective sense-making elected someone who declares climate change a hoax.
Well,
now,
I mean,
how the hell are you going to change that system?
Well, I mean,
Right.
one part is, and we can touch on that later around liquid or representative democracy is, but it's a problem of representative democracy, right? Where you just buy a basket of policy positions versus another basket of policy positions. And other aspects of the basket of Trump were just really favorable to people
Compared to the alternative.
compared to the alternative.
For some people.
For some
Yes.
people. Well, for the majority of people, actually,
Clearly,
in this
yeah.
case.
Well, not quite just less than a majority. 49.9%, something like that.
But
Yeah,
people
you're
who
right.
turned out to vote.
Well,
In any case, I agree that
Yeah.
position I'm also not.
Yes.
But that would be actually a great example where, okay, here would be the counter by let's keep Game A around for this. Can't we add something like a carbon tax, or can we not just find out more information about how we can, like how much CO2 we can raise where we are, innovate on allow more fission, innovate on fusion, all of those things,
all those things are worth doing, and I advocate for them within the context of Game A. I take off my Game B hat fairly often and go play Game A politics, right? In 2016, I actually worked for the Bernie campaign, for instance, right? And I believed in the Bernie campaign. It wasn't perfect, but it would have been a substantial step of amelioration on Game A. Unfortunately, by 2020, Bernie had gone nuts, so I did not work for the Bernie campaign in 2020. And but with my let's talk about both hats. Let's talk the Game A hat first. There is a proposal that's been floating around since 2015 around around carbon tax. It was signed by 300 academic economists, right and left, that this is the right way to do it, which is the following, which is a carbon tax which starts at a moderate level and it's stipulated to increase at a uniform rate for 20 years and then stay at that rate until we've stabilized carbon, and then it will go down. And this is the key part, the carbon tax will be 100% refunded per capita to the citizens. Right? So it's not giving yet more money to the government to do God knows what.
So
right?
it's not even to develop direct air capture or anything like that. It's just straight up.
I would add to it that that you should, and I think they did have in the fine print of their system that if you can do capture, you'll be paid, right?
Yeah, okay.
You'll be paid the inverse of the tax, right?
Yeah.
So it sets very interesting, very simple, and very playable rules for a game. So obvious that this is within 10% of the right answer that I've thought long and hard about. Couldn't come up with a better one within the Game Cake context. Not a single political entity in the world has even considered this, right?
So why is that?
Because the power of the business sectors that do not want to have to pay the tax is so strong that it corrupts the politics of every country on earth, and not just the U.S., which is relatively easy to corrupt politicians in the U.S. Europe's a little harder, but not that hard. And so even Europe with their cap and trades, all bogus, that hasn't worked at all. Anybody could have predicted it. That's extraordinarily simple, that uses the power of the market to send signals that are stable and predictable over a long period of time, which would, I'm quite confident, turn the curve on the climate change problem in time, would come close to the optimal minimization of total cost. Doesn't even get a hearing on any major country on earth. If something as simple as that, as easy as that to explain, which, oh, by the way, will give you a dividend check every month. And for most people, the dividend check will be bigger than the tax that was imputed in their purchases. Why? Because consumption of energy is highly asymmetric. Right. Rich fucks consume many times the energy of the median person, which means probably 70% of people will get a net economic benefit from this thing.
So it even improves the Gini coefficient.
Right.
As well,
Yeah, exactly. And
so that's why you're going on about money on money returns, because in this case, the companies actually have, as Daniel Schmallenberg put it, the CEO and the board, they act as obligate sociopaths, right? They have to, by law,
in the United States,
fiduciary duty, optimize for the relatively short-term profit. There, you can have like a public benefit corporation, but very few are.
Yep. And you can't actually modify your bylaws. I have pointed this out when the B Corp came around. So you don't actually have to do that. You couldn't modify your bylaws, but nobody does, right?
Yeah, nobody does. And the investors will go to the one which doesn't infer.
Right. And this is the multipolar trap.
Yes.
One of the, we haven't talked about it as much as we should actually, but the capital investment structure of Moloch is also hugely powerful, right? Because everything is financed by pension funds and big mutual funds, et cetera. And they are second order obligate sociopaths, right? And it's way easier to measure their returns because you can look at their financial returns to the 100th%, right? And people will move their money, particularly, big pension funds will move from one money manager to the other for relatively small amounts. So that game is even more intensely Moloch than the corporate world is because it's utterly fungible.
So then the question on that would be, wouldn't it still be a game to say, hey, we now require, I suppose that's what some of these campaigns try to do when they do, what was it, big reporting where you had to do sustainability.
ESG.
ESG is obviously bullshit. It's just a bunch of forms that you have to fill out, and the better you fill out forms, the more you win.
Enriches consultants.
ESG was a terrible game, obviously, but what is the very good version of it? Or I suppose we're maybe just coming to game B, but what I'm saying is if I added another system of care, basically outside of just the direct money incentive, there is also a not sustainability, but like long-term viability incentive or something.
Yeah, how do you structure that? You got So you'll need additional signals, hence the bluefish coin, hence the oak coin.
That's the problem. Basically, anything where you're trying to compress all this information down into singular metrics, which is what ESG did. It's like a different score. It's insufficient. So you need
high dimensionality.
Exactly, which is what you're basically advocating for. Everything has a coin, which is where actually crypto is so useful. Yep. But every common resource, every common good, etc., where it's hard to exclude people from, but it's a scarce resource. You need some kind of tokenization to measure it and allocate it, but you still maintain market dynamics by allowing for trading.
Yeah, and markets are very important. One of the beauties of markets is they're free, right? I don't like bluefish. I don't have to eat bluefish. If I lived in the Soviet Union, everybody get their chunk of bluefish, eat it or starve, right? In Game B, we would never do that. We would just say that the people who are responsible for managing this biosystem, which is the people who live along the littoral, have decided this is what that this area can tolerate in terms of use of bluefish, and it will diffuse out to the whole world by using markets. Right? Markets are one of humanity's greatest inventions, so we certainly don't want to throw them away. Let me get also back to, as you were going down the list, you can make Rutt dictator for a week, maybe we could fix Game A, right?
Your words, not mine, but I'm down.
Yeah. That's good, great idea. But let's go to the one that actually go all the way, run the clock back to 1994 when I first awoke, right? My first proposal was to eliminate all advertising from all electronic media, TV, radio. This was the very early days of the internet, et cetera. So I think I actually argued for linear media like TV and radio to limit advertising to 2 minutes an hour and to ban it entirely from random access media like the internet. Because that gets back to this Bernays problem, the epoch of Bernays, where we can manufacture the status games that people feel obligate to play. And in fact, let's connect two things here. This is always fun when we can do this. Slot machines and advertising, right? Folks at high enough level of hierarchical complexity can choose not to play the advertising-driven game, right? I can easily afford to buy all the Land Rovers I want, and I drive a beat-up 8-year-old Jeep, just cause, right? Because I don't give a fuck. In the same way that none of us are going to become victims of slot machine addiction, I think, at a very high level of probability. Hence, the same argument why slot machines are probably too dangerous for most people says that advertising is too dangerous for most people because it forms money-on-money return only driven status games that inevitably lead to increased consumption and pressure on the world, in addition to sucking brain power out of us that could be used for something else. Instead of working the extra hours to make the payments on your Land Rover, maybe you do a painting, or maybe you spend times with your grandkids, et cetera. It's sort of an evil attractor, and the only reason it exists is because it can be engineered to be profitable in monetary terms. So again, until you get rid of advertising, you're still in game A.
Right, but yet we still allow slot machines. We don't want to ban them, right? Or would you? I imagine game B doesn't suggest banning such a thing. It's just it's still very it's a very voluntary.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Actually, game B is curious because it doesn't specify things like that, but it allows the banning and allows the non-banning through a concept
in different membranes.
Different membranes. We call it coherent pluralism. Everyone agrees to 6 or 7 top-level accords. And then as you go down the stack of embedded membranes, we also use the idea of subsidiarity. So you push decisions down as low in the stack as you possibly can. So let's take the example of advertising. A membrane may ban advertising-supported media from coming through its walls. I don't know how it would do that, but let's say it could. Another one could say, oh yeah, well, we don't mind advertising. We're going to educate our people with ninja mind tricks to be able to ignore advertising, which you may be able to do. And that's one of the things that we think is central to game B, is that it's a high-dimensional search for human well-being rather than a diktat for human well-being. So let some membranes allow slot machines and others to ban them, and then they'll communicate with each other on a horizontal information bus. And over time, some consensus will arise on whether everybody should ban them or nobody should ban them, or some people should and some people shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the methods of? Because I mean, it sounds like it really rests upon these nested structures that have almost perfect information sharing with one another.
Well, it don't have to be perfect; just has to have some.
Okay, so a sufficient
more the
amount.
better. More the better.
High quality.
Right.
Good faith. Non-corrupted.
Have you done any practical experiments whereby these types of structures have successfully, have you tried living in a membrane, or do you know anyone that has?
I do know some people that have, and most of them have failed. And pretty sure we know why, is that they didn't realize they were living in a membrane. Think of your classic hippie communes, right? Or the eco-village today, right? What they haven't done is stopped before they started and said, wait a minute, I'm in a membrane. It's semi-permeable. Stuff has to go in, has to go out, but also stuff has to come in. And so what's the economics of my membrane? What engine is the equivalent of the mitochondria in my membrane so that my membrane works? The word I use is membranes have to work. And holding hands and saying kumbaya is not enough to make the membrane work. So what does your internal economy look like, i.e. what can you provide to each other? Okay, we'll apply babysitting to each other and maybe homeschooling, and maybe we'll grow some percentage of our food, but we still need to buy a lot of stuff too. What could we do for game A that will allow us to make enough game A tokens to buy the things we need from outside to bring through the membrane? And I can tell you that most of the folks that have set up these experiments in the past did not think in that mercantilist way. And once we lay this all out, I would hope that anyone who labels themselves game B before they launch will actually give serious consideration the same way you would in a startup to make sure that it works.
Look into failure modes.
Yeah, and specifically think through what is the fuel that your thing needs from game A, and what are you going to do for game A to earn that fuel?
Right, because that's my next question. Is like, you're technically trying to outcompete game A, while at the same time there is space for competition within game B.
Yes.
Is that correct?
But it has to be mediated and by accord so that you don't fall into the Moloch traps.
Right. You have to be consciously aware of externalities at all times.
Up and down the stack, horizontally with your peers that you're in competition with, so you're competing fairly. Up the stack so you're not caught in traps by your investors, and then below the impact you have on people. So what Daniel Schmachtenberger would call omni-consideration, which is a core game B term.
Right. You want all the impact on all involved stakeholders to be essentially measured.
We can't measure. This is where I have grown, he says, not just my waistline, which is, if you had asked me in 1994, yeah, we can measure it all. No, you can't. At the end of the day, we have to rely on our human intuitions and our collective sense-making abilities, which are not formally logical. And we have to, in good faith, communicate with each other however we choose to communicate through a governance mechanism of some sort at every scale. and use our human ability to feel our way towards solutions that are going to be imperfect and partial, but are not corrupted by the things we know we don't want to be corrupted by. And the other part about it, and which again differs, like Game B differs a lot from many other of these kinds of revolutionary ideas, is we don't think that the first set of answers are the right answers. It's a process. It's an ongoing search for what works, and it's a sorting out of what works and what doesn't work and what sort of works. And
what I like about that is that it sounds like you're not presupposing that there is a certain set of rules that would ever apply continuously, right? Like the many of the past kind of philosophies, like even if you take the three big ones of utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics, like they all kind of try to have a certain set of optimizations that they have and then a certain set of rules underneath. But actually, if you take each of them and become an ardent follower of exactly that, you always get in each of them to very absurd outcomes and cases. And therefore
never go full utilitarian.
That's why when people make the claim that, then the ends fully justify the means, you can do this. It's like, yes, that's why you never go full ends justify the means.
Or next thing you end up as an EA person or something. Right?
Well, even worse, you end up as SBF actually.
Right, specifically.
But yes.
Most EAs are full utilitarians.
Same applies to deontology. It's like if you go full deontologician, then you end up letting the axe murderer and you tell where Anne Frank is in your house, etc. Right? Like you just do these type of actions. Anyway, my point is, I think that I liked is that you emphasize that you kind of have to trust human intuition a bit, and you have to improve your intuition by just probably learning a bit more, etc.
Oh, and I think this is where
understanding that there is no fixed set of rules that can sufficiently describe the complexity of reality.
And in fact, rules themselves are ephemeral. Even the top level rules will be evolved by some process not yet defined. And I think this is another very important Game B thing, is that any set of accords are only the current snapshot of a dynamic process that will be undergoing some trajectory. And that trajectory will be both endogenous and exogenous. Endogenous, meaning the people inside the membrane are learning, right? We had the rule, no bubble gum, because we didn't want bubble gum on the streets. And we go, well, I think we're now mature enough that we're smart enough to put the gum in the trash, right? So let's change the rule. And so we should always be thinking about any set of accords as a snapshot on a trajectory of the growth of this institutional personal spiral upward. And that is also hugely important when we think about how this is going to be done.
So maybe one rule you do have is that there are no fixed rules.
Okay, Mr. Goidel.
That's the only rule. So it sounds like, obviously does. It's a very decentralized sense making. It also has a lot of network thinking. So and there are two movements in this direction currently, right? Like there are a lot of people pro decentralization. It's the crypto people. It's the EACs actually as well. And then in the network state, they're like the Balaji, etc.
In fact, Balaji.
How have all of them? I imagine you've had some conversations with some of these people.
Quite hilariously, Game B is actually listed as a network state example.
That makes sense.
And they have asked us to be, part of their meetings and stuff, and we just said we're not opposed to what you're doing, and what we're doing is sort of compatible, but it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah.
They're so fiercely financially libertarian that they don't understand, at least I don't think they understand, the high dimensionality of the nature of the problem.
Right.
They're a very simplistic solution, but some of their ideas are good, but one of their ideas is fundamentally bad, which is that you can do all this on the network and at least for a long time not have control of the ground. There has to be a base level to get the highest fidelity form of living, because while we all live in the networks to some degree, most people get most of what they get out of the world from their actual neighbors on the ground, their community, their caregivers, taking care of their parents, taking care of their neighbors, etc. And I think that these very left brain, to use the cliche, but let's use it in the intelligent Ian McGilchrist fashion, very left. You should have him on your show, by the way. I know him pretty well. I can hook you up.
Yes, please.
The left brain folks think they could live in a network world. Maybe they could if they're aspy enough, right? But for normies, the ground is important, and not every game B membrane will have ground initially. Probably most won't.
What do you mean by ground?
Earth.
Okay.
So in other words, a community on the ground with a fence around it.
That's like membrane. Actual physical meat
location.
Space.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood.
Touching the grass.
Yeah, touching the grass or touching the asphalt even, right? Because it could be in town. And it could be, let's say, for instance, 10 people move to the same neighborhood in, South Austin, and even though their properties don't touch, each of them is part of the same membrane, right? And declare this to be a Game B membrane. When you walk into their house, you play by Game B rules. And when you're outside the house, you're back to Game A motherfucker rules.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like probably the thing I would imagine where they have a disagreement with Game B. Yeah, there is significant overlap, similar with the EACs, but I think both
what
of those...
What is EX?
So, EAC is effective accelerationism.
Oh, those fuckers?
Yeah, exactly.
No.
But actually, they have some right ideas. By the way, I think that on net they're unfortunately making everything worse.
Exactly.
But I think that they have touched on and emphasized certain points that others haven't sufficiently emphasized. So, for example, that safety is being used as a veneer for control, etc.
Which is true.
It's true.
Right.
Or that just beware of over-centralization. It's also true.
That's also true.
They are much more in favor of decentralization than many other communities that have tried all of these government-backed solutions while the government is still as faulty as it is currently. So, and I genuinely appreciate their work in that.
Agree with those things.
They just don't realize, or they insufficiently don't take into account that by just blindly saying, just go faster, you're also accelerating the centralization problem.
So that's exactly. And
the Chinese love that, right?
I know, they're thrilled with what EACs are doing. They're like, yep, great.
If we again take the complex adaptive system lens, the point that the both of these communities make is kind of just, hey, capitalism is great, libertarianism is great, just trust it. It's going to be great. You can't predict the future anyway. Especially the founder of EAC likes to say that in quantum mechanics, there is this Lyapunov exponent, which describes like your kind of like fuzz or uncertainty in the system. And as the system progresses over time,
it gets bigger and bigger.
In a chaotic system, it becomes bigger and bigger, and you can predict less and less, which is only part of the story. Because the other part of the story is that after even more time, some things become easier to predict, actually. I don't know whether the stock market is going to go up or down tomorrow, but I can bet with 90% certainty that in 10 years, it's going to be higher than it is today.
That's, I call this the ensemble of trajectories, right? This is a complexity science idea.
Yeah, there are attractor states.
Yeah, you can say that there's an ensemble of trajectories that we will probably be in, and the stock market's a perfect example that on average, 10 years from now, the trajectory we actually walk, which I cannot predict, will be one that ends up at a positive return of above 7% or whatever the hell it is. But you can't predict what trajectory it'll be.
Right.
And this is another Game B concept we call epistemic humility, right? That applying formal complexity theory and diffusion, et cetera, we can't see that far ahead. But what we can do is get better tools to see further ahead. For instance, agent-based modeling is probably better than traditional differential equation-based economics for trying to understand these trajectories. But it's not going to be perfect for the very simple reason of deterministic chaos, right? It was shown with the Lorentz equations that even a very simple set of equations, initial conditions, can produce utterly, chaotic systems that go out very far you can't predict. So it's a combination of honoring epistemic humility, but at the same time trying to build binoculars that'll let us see another 25 feet ahead on the road.
I'd love to hear you also talk about why you think that Game A is self-terminating, but specifically from a complex adaptive system lens.
Yeah, I would say a complex adaptive system lens, broadly construed, to also include broader system science. Because we often talk about trajectories and predictability or lack thereof, epistemic humility, et cetera. But what people forget is that real world systems also have boundary conditions, right? For instance, if you make the assumption that we can grow infinitely, then exponential growth as driven by late stage financialized capitalism could work, right? But the reality is we have a finite planet with finite carrying capacity. Let me give a historical example. I arbitrarily defined that Game A started on February 24th, 1694, right? Just for fun. It's the day the Bank of England was founded. And it was one of the three pieces of Game A, which is financialized capitalism. We always have had capitalism. Financialized capitalism started with the Bank of Amsterdam, Bank of England. Democracy, which started right about the same time in England with the Glorious Revolution of 1688, and then the scientific revolutions of the 17th century, Newton and Boyle and those guys and the equivalents on the continent. So roughly speaking, other people say it started 5,000 years ago, but for whatever, it doesn't really matter. But let's say Game A started in 1700. The population of the Earth in 1700 was only 650 million people, about a 12th of what it is today. Each of those was consuming about a 10th per capita of the resources of the world in terms of wood and energy and metals and things of that sort. So you multiply a 10th times a 12th, and when the human race as a whole was 120th, less than 1% of the impact on the planet that we as humanity are today. It was not worth worrying about at that time. It seemed like nature was way bigger than humanity, and just going for it was a good thing. Because in 1700, most people lived in huts with dirt floors. 50% of kids were dead by the time they were 5. We didn't know dick about medicine. That was pretty horrible unless you're that rare nobility. And so Game A was a wonderful thing. Those three things that came together, democracy, technology, and finance, caused an explosion that we're still in today, but it's an exponential explosion. And in fact, the exponential component is cooked in by the financial part. The way that finance works with respect to bonds, it's easier to understand with respect to bonds and also the money supply, is you're stuck on an exponential growth curve period or you'll die. It's like a shark. If you stop swimming, you'll sink and die. So the three together are hooked by the money on money return machine into a perpetual exponential growth. And so think about a world that's big, but we humans are small in 1700, and we've been growing exponentially now for 325 years. We are close to the wall. In fact, some people think we're past the wall. The 9 planetary boundaries, supposedly we're over 4 or 5 of them and approaching the rest of them. Of course, people choose those things. They choose them for sometimes political reasons.
Right.
But whatever it is, we're getting closer. Right? Closer to the wall. And if we were to, it's just very simple. You don't even need any fancy network theory. When an exponential is reaching its boundary condition, it's going to crash, period. Right? What happens in overpopulation, the famous hares and lynxes things where the rabbits go crazy and then the lynxes go crazy and then they both die off, right?
Malthusian.
It's not exactly Malthusian, but Malthusian is one variant of it. So it's just relatively obvious that when you start small and you grow exponentially for 325 years, you eventually fill up the space. And so that alone does it. Of course, there's many other self-terminating ways. For instance, the invention of advanced and low-cost biotechnologies, right? How far are we away from a misanthropic incel in their basement using home CRISPR to splice some Ebola into the common cold, right? That could be a failure mode.
Okay, but I think the reasonable pushback that most people have to this statement of, okay, we're approaching boundary conditions is, yes, but we've always innovated and expanded the boundary. And so why is this different?
And we can't, because at this point, the one boundary that we'd never be able to expand is Earth itself, right? And yes, we could go to Mars, but that's an idiot idea. We should go to the asteroids, actually. Elon, asteroids first, not Mars. But the amount of humans and the amount of our work that's going to be put into space anytime soon is absolutely de minimis. Now, over tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, could be very significant, but not in time to save us from crushing ourselves as we hit the wall with respect to the carrying capacity of the Earth. Now,
But I mean, but what specific carrying capacity? Like you're saying, is it just like arable land, the ability to
topsoil, arable lands, water we can actually solve by brute force using desalination. That one's solvable, it turns out.
Can't we innovate our way through like reinvigorating the soils?
We haven't found a way to do that yet.
Vertical regenerative farming.
Yeah. Charles Eisenstein has a very interesting way of putting this, which is even to the degree we can, do we want to? He says, oh yeah, we could probably have a population of 3 times the one we have today, but it would be a world of concrete and shit, right? Where we'd be living.
I kind of want to push back on that because there's who is it? Matthew Iglesias wrote this book, 1 Billion Americans.
Yes, I read the book.
Yeah, and he points out that if the U.S. went up to 1 billion, it would be the population density of France.
Exactly. U.S. can do it, but we're not talking about the U.S., talking about the world.
But we also have a lot of lower density than the U.S. places, right? It wouldn't be. I mean, what things would still concentrate. You would still have Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Mexico City, etc. Become massive.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Or you would have more of them.
Game B would say probably they gradually evaporate because they have outlived their useful purpose. This is a good complexity science term. The work by Jeffrey West and Luis Betancourt and some others, the Santa Fe Institute, University of Chicago, I think Luis is at these days, have discovered that animals have scaling laws. You know, they get bigger, but their metabolism slows down relatively. Otherwise, they would explode, basically. But cities have the opposite. As they get bigger, they scale positively. The per capita income goes up, basically, but crime goes up, patents go up, musical compositions go up at approximately 15% for each doubling. So if you take a city at 1 million and it grows to 2 million, not only will it do twice as many patents, it'll do 20 plus 15% more patents. So it's an increasing returns scale, but it applies to both the good and the bad. You know, mental health, disease, crime, et cetera. And this is where technology actually is important. Jordan Hall has come up with this concept he calls the civium, which I think encapsulates this in an easily understood fashion, which is by the good use of networks and network protocols, we ought to be able to capture the positive returns of scale by a global set of fractal networks that can work together at any scale. Because, by the way, Game B does not want to give up on going to the stars. We don't want to give up on being able to build things like the Gravity Observatory, which took 30 years across the whole world, basically, to build. But we don't need to live in cities to do it. Cities are, as I say, they have a negative scaling law. Every time I come into a big city, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. Austin's sort of barely tolerable. Anything bigger than Austin is like, Jesus, get me the hell out of here. And as people become more self-aware and are higher in capacity, it's our conjecture, at least, that if there were a way to make a good living, people would prefer not to live in big cities, and especially if they could capture those innovation and economic scaling laws. So my hypothesis would be that big cities gradually evaporate over some period of time. And there are some people who just like big cities.
I think it's a function of age. I liked a big city when I was under the age of 25. I loved it. I was hungry for it. I grew up in the country and I was interminably bored all the time. And I was just looking because you're trying to expand your network and learn about the world, and you just want to maximize the number of interactions you have. And so big cities are naturally attractive.
And it's thought that is actually what drives this increasing return to scale it's that interactions are cheaper in a big city.
Right.
And that's also in part why cities have actually survived, or rather the big cities have survived longer than the big empires. Right, in many cases.
Yeah, much longer.
Rome is
Damascus is still around. It's gone through 8,000 years of history. Many empires have come and went. Damascus is still there.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, as populations age, I could see that being another forcing function of why big cities will cool off.
I suspect that we'll see at least one Game B hypothesis. Because you're absolutely right about the life cycle. Young people need to go out and explore.
Right.
And so we would expect that people in early. And frankly, I hope they start doing it at like age 16. This idea that you have to be 22 or 23 to be an adult is kind of nutty, right? You should actually get out in the world when you're 15 or 16 and travel from one community to another. And communities will be clustered, so there'll be numerous of them close together. There may be units that are maybe the equivalent of a small city that are within a few miles of each other, and go out and try various communities and see what you like, and interact with various people, track down the thought figures that you want to interact with them and their communities. So I do believe there's still going to be a need for young people to mix and to interact and to get exposed to new things. But do we need the big cities to do that? I don't know. Time will tell. And again, Game B doesn't say we need to abolish the big cities. We're not Pol Pot going to march everybody off into the countryside. But it's our hypothesis that if the only way to get increasing returns is no longer the city, the non-city way of getting increasing returns to scale will on net be more attractive over time. So it'll be movement of people from the city to the non-city.
What about, again, coming back to planetary boundaries, populations are already declining in many nations, most Western nations, actually.
Yep.
And projections are always updating, but it seems like we're going to, as a global population, taper off around 11 billion.
10 or 11.
10 or 11, yeah. It was 11. It's already probably been down-weighted to 10 or so within the next 5-10 years, and then things are going to start declining.
The peak will be at the end of the century, approximately.
It's a little later when you reach 10 billion, but in any case.
Okay, yeah, no, you're right. I'm not. My number's wrong.
It's irrelevant to the point.
Yeah, but the point is, like, we're reaching a global maximum likely of population, and then things are going to decline anyway. So again, isn't that going to take pressure off planetary systems?
That takes pressure, but where the real pressure is coming from, and keep in mind, we won't reach the peak till around 2100, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of momentum built into population systems. Right. What's actually crunching the world right now, because population growth has slowed considerably, is the rising GDP per capita, right? If everybody on Earth had an American level standard of living,
we'd be in the shit.
We would be deeply, deeply in the shit. And how can you morally say that those people shouldn't have the same
of course.
Standard of living that we have? And they all aspire to. And it would, and one of the things I use as a very rough rule of thumb is what is the energetic intensity of a civilization, and what just calculate simply as a continuous watt power of a society. How many watts are you consuming 24 hours a day? It turns out for the U.S., Australia, and Canada, who are the big countries, or the three big offenders, it's about 11,000 watts continuous. So you have 110 100-watt bulbs burning all the time, including everything you do, including all the products you consume. Sub-Saharan Africa, less than 500. Nepal, a little bit more, 600. India, about 1,000. China, about 4,000. And what I find very interesting is Portugal, which is a pretty good place to live, about 4,000. So it is probably possible that even before we can get rid of fossil fuels entirely, we could steer our society to something like a 4,000 watt society. And we could bring the people that are below 4,000 watts up, and we can allow the people that are above 4,000 watts to slowly, over 2 or 3 generations, settle back down to around 4,000 watts. And we can all have approximately the same material existence. Now, it'll be qualitatively very different. People will choose to spend their energy differently. And probably we can get to zero carbon by 2070 or so, and provide 4,000 watts continuous to everybody on Earth, and do it just barely in time and in a way that has a very substantial amount of justice built into it.
But again, this is the assumptions based upon sort of current energy production paradigms, including presumably, the continuous decoupling between carbon and energy usage, which is progressively happening.
And we're assuming growth curve, so-called learning curves on all the technologies as well. Not that.
I see. So that's baked in, like innovation.
That's a key part of the Santa Fe Institute work on alternative energy. Is the team there that did that work has been following things like heat engines, the steam engine, gas turbines, jet engines, rockets, and they have a predictable learning curve to them over 250 years, which is amazing. Now, it's a series of S curves that one starts and the next one starts. Same's been true for electrical generation. Same's been true for petroleum refining. And they've created these curves for the alternative energy things as well. And so I come up with the back of the envelope 4,000 number, assuming the reasonable set of innovations and learning curves. But, and I also always acknowledge this, no fundamental breakthrough, right? Like for instance,
AI, like something
or
created
fusion,
by
desktop cold fusion or something, right? 0 point energy, right?
Well, right.
But probably fusion could have some impact at the margin within our planning horizon. But there could be a technological breakthrough that could make that happen earlier, but probably isn't going to be significant enough to save the day by sort of 2060, 2070, where things start to get pretty sticky.
Can't scaling solar or fission get us there as well? Like if we removed regulation and just...
And we should do all those things, and they will help. But just talk to Nate Hagens.
Right, I know he has a...
He and his folks have done, they come up with 2,000 watt society is the best we can do.
It's just when most people hear 4,000 watt society or 2,000 watt society, it sounds very unexciting to be in a kind of like a level wattage use among all people.
Sounds dystopian to most people.
It sounds kind of dystopian.
It sounds degrowthy
this is hugely important.
It sounds very kind of like, I know that it's not, but it sounds very equity and degrowth coded.
I hate the word degrowth, right? Because it confuses two different things, right? Look at an iPhone. Ain't much in it except sand and a little bit of metal, and yet there's a huge amount of captured intellectual property in it. So that is a good kind of growth from the perspective of the planet. You're not doing much harm to the planet when you buy an iPhone. You're doing a little bit, but not if you went and spent $1,000 on aluminum, or you can buy a lot of aluminum for $1,000.
Coal,
2x4s, coal, corn, right? Corn's renewable, so. Copper bars, right? You're doing way more harm to the environment than $1,000 for an iPhone. And so we have to distinguish between enriching things versus just more bulk stuff. Simple example I give is clothes. This current fast fashion fad of, we'll wear clothes for 6 weeks, throw them out, order some more on Temu, off we go, right? Definitely not good for the environment. How about instead we bought clothes that were long-lasting and well-made, and let's say in just a particular Game B membrane, one of the crafts that is practiced there and is a compensated role is we embroider each other's clothes to tell our lives stories, right? And so your clothes get to be embroidered by the embroidery people. And each week, each month, a little bit more of your life story is embossed in your clothing. But your clothing is designed to last for 20 years, right, or 10 years. And so instead of having cycling through new clothes every 6 weeks, you basically cycle through your clothes every 5 or 10 years. You don't have as many, but they're much, much better made. And they tell your own story in an artful form. As an example of clothing growth in the microsphere, which is this beautiful embroidery and the telling of your life story, but not growing in the macrosphere of throwing shit away constantly and just churning for churning's sake.
Right, so you're substituting materialism for meaning.
Quality and meaning and intricacy. Actually, Richard Feynman said this a long time ago. He such a brilliant guy. He foresaw, even though he didn't know the mechanisms for nanotechnology, he said there's a lot of room at the bottom. There's a lot of ways to do chips, computer chips, of course, a perfect example of that. 50 billion transistor gates, and that's basically a piece of sand about this big. And yet a huge amount of stack of value chain goes into creating that thing. And that's the kind of good growth as opposed to gross growth.
So it's growth into the microscopic, essentially, or into smaller scales.
And in reality,
you're getting more efficiency out of like a smaller amount of material.
Yeah.
Physical material.
Essentially, it's freezing information and knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because the chip has to be designed. But the beauty of information, Stuart Brand made the famous statement, information wants to be free. Or was it Kevin Kelly? It was one of the two of them. But it doesn't really matter. They're both closely related to each other in their business careers. The reason that information is so cool and things like computer chips are so cool is it costs hundreds of millions or billions to design a state-of-the-art chip. It costs way less to stamp them out, right? And so the marginal cost is way lower. And so if we start to think about a non-rivalrous economics, where if instead where people can have things at more or less their marginal cost plus enough addition to incentivize people to invent more rather than playing rent-seeking games, then everybody could be way richer in captured intricacy, shall we say, or art, et cetera. And we think this is a way that there's no reason to be dystopian. I would also add the following. More is just tiring, right? You get up in the morning, I want to get a promotion at work so I can buy a bigger boat with a 200 horsepower motor instead of 125 horsepower motor. Why? No good reason other than that you're trapped in a Bernays epoch status game loop. Why should you be investing your life energy in doing that? Instead, you can play the game with a different set of rules. The rules is, what kind of cool life can I have for 4,000 watts, right? Any game can be played. And there are plenty of moves in the 4,000 watt world where you can have a much better world or a much worse world, depending on the discernment you have on how to play that game.
I agree. It just seems, knowing all the people I know, even the more like game B kind of favorable type thinkers,
right,
is that we have become so accustomed to just more filling the holes in our souls with
shit,
with more entertainment or experiences, etc. It doesn't have to be material, but it's just experiences, which are typically still high consumption.
Yeah, flying around in a jet going
exactly.
to Bangkok.
They have a lot of externalities, etc. Yeah, I don't know how or see how, particularly as we're trapped in the sort of status games of social media, which is all about showing off what you did today. Instagram, it's like, look where I'm visiting, the whatever new cool thing I have, like how it needs you. Yes, you have the system, you can redesign systems and like incentives, but it feels like you also need this like internal shift.
Yeah, that's the personal change part, right?
Right.
You need to have gone somehow through some change, or just be a contrary fuck like me, to say, I'm beyond all that. I no longer need to do that. And then, but the key part is I now have to be scaffolded in a micro society that rewards that says that hey, Liv, that's a great thing that you have 9 dresses and they're beautifully embroidered, right? And that you got the coolest bike anybody's ever seen, right? That's been tuned and adjusted until fare thee well. Till this is the greatest bicycle in the valley, rather than all the macro status games that we were played. And that's my point earlier, that if you go through some modest personal change and then you're thrown back into the rat race will capture you 98 times out of 100. So you got to do both. You got to have the micro society and the personal change, and both are indispensable. You take a rando off the street, take a stockbroker, and toss them into a game B village, ain't gonna work.
No,
right? They're gonna go nuts, or we'll have to kill them. Right? This is the Chris Boehm, the book, one of the most important books ever written. People, go read it. It's now free. It's a PDF.
What's it called?
It's called Hierarchy in the Forest, and it's the forager operating system that defeated the big man. Chris goes through. He was a Santa Fe affiliated anthropologist. And he goes through the historical, the biological ancestry of humanity. And it says, based on that, you should predict that humans would be very hierarchical and dictatorial, right? Like apes are, basically, like chimps in particular. And bonobos in a different way, but they still play that same kind of very top-down status game. Humans figured out a way to diffuse that game. And he even gives a hypothesis on what allowed them, what was the technological affordance that allowed them to do that. And he claims for most of our society, times as humans, the forager operating system was highly tuned to suppress big men, people who claimed general authority. And I stop here, we'll sidebar this. Turns out Game B had come up with a similar idea before we knew about Chris, in which we talk about role-based leadership versus position-based leadership, right? And in Chris's book, he'll say, the young guy who really knows how to capture rabbits leads the rabbit hunt. The old tracker, knows how to lead the group on to the next camp spot without getting ambushed. The granny knows how to find the tubers, and those are the leaders for each activity. And when somebody else becomes better at that, they just naturally accede to it. While position-based leadership is, I'm the chief, I'm the boss, you do what I tell you.
I dictate everything, yeah.
And it's general, I'm in the box, therefore I have all the powers of the box, even if I'm not competent. And so the hierarchy in the forest lays out that humans developed a distinct distaste for big men. They honored their autonomy and their capacity to be, their own selves very, very highly. And they had a hierarchy of ways or a process of dealing with big men. First, they ignored them. Let's say you're the big man, and they could be a woman, probably not very often. 99% of the time, they're probably men. But they, you just ignore them. Let them run their mouth, and eventually they'll get the hint. Nobody gives a shit. But let's say they're big and tough. They go around to grab people, and say, I want you to do this. Then you basically laugh at them. There are a few things that are more subversive to people trying to establish puffed up power than laughing at them, right? And then if they get, more obnoxious than that, round at a couple of their buddies or something, try to, more or less suppress us, then you exile them. And if they come back, you kill them. And that's just the way it is. And I do think that.
And which societies lived like that? Or
according to Boehm, it was an overgeneralization, as Graeber and who's the other guy? They wrote that very cool book right before Graeber died. It's a
doesn't matter.
Winslow, or I don't know, look it up. But anyway, his claim is that all forager people basically lived this way for 290,000 years versus 290,000 years of human existence.
So basically, pre the agricultural revolution,
even
the average hunter-gatherer society would that's how they would keep power maximizers in check.
Yes.
Be like the alpha male, the classic alpha male.
Yeah, the big man, right?
Yeah.
And when there's probably a genetic tendency to produce a percent or two of big men in any society.
Right.
And we just got to say, okay, that kind of personality type might be great to be a Marine or something. A corporal, no higher rank than a corporal. You should not have power over other people, but that kind of forceful personality can be good to go kill the enemy when necessary. But never, never, never give big men control of the levers. Unfortunately, our system is designed to call to the big men. Here are the levers, big men, come and get them.
And part of it is efficient. I'm somewhat sympathetic to the hierarchy in the forest idea I described. On the previous point, though, where what does it requires personal change as well to move there, and we talked about that. Someone goes on a 42-day retreat, you said, and then they come back and then they get thrown back into the scaffolding and it changes. But at the same time, frankly, if the world consisted of 70% or whatever percent of people who are of the type, how the ones that just came back from a 42-day retreat, it sounds pretty boring to me. It doesn't sound very appealing. It sounds like a lot of kumbaya and woodworking and
doesn't have to be
kind of like an Amish style society. It's where everybody's equal, and it doesn't sound like. Game B also emphasizes anti-fragility, right? If you have anti-fragility, then you can actually hit it and try to break it, explode stuff,
and lots of variety, right?
Let something happen.
Coherent pluralism is very cool. I mean, there could be people who spend all their time playing warrior games, right? And they pick up kendo or something. It doesn't. I personally have no interest at all in kumbaya, sitting around the campfire all the time. Though I would like to do it every Friday night. Jamie Wheel, I actually asked him to design.
It shouldn't be the only activity.
No, by any means, right? And those kind of people drive me nuts. These ones who want to meditate all the time and all that horse shit. I meditated for 20 minutes a day for 40 days before I did my John Vervaeke podcast. And I said, this is kind of boring as shit, and it just didn't do anything for me. But give me a nice single ball, much better. But for some people, that's the right thing to do. And again, coherent pluralism, there want to be whole communities of kumbaya people. Let's see how they make it in the world, right? And there are other people who are constantly thinking about what cool thing can we do as humans with the affordances we have, right? How do we get to the stars? How do we create the ASI? How do we figure out how to increase human longevity to 1,000 years? There will still be lots and lots of people that want to do those things, and Game B is not at all opposed to them doing it, so long as you do it in an omni-considerate way and within the constraints of our planetary limits.
Well, I mean, when you mentioned ASI, like that might be one that is very, very hard to get consensus on whether that can be constrained, because by definition, you are building something that cannot be.
Not by definition, but it is
Well,
a strong,
by
it's strong inference
extrapolation,
that
yes.
may well be the case that we can't control it.
Hope it's not by definition unconstrainable.
Yeah,
No, you're right. It's not by definition.
Some people
but
think it is. I mean,
to me, it feels like it is. I have to say.
Eliezer Yudkowsky believes that by definition it's uncontrollable. I've argued with him about that, and I do think it is potentially controllable. We could fuck up. There's a lot of ways we could fuck up. ASI, nanotech, biotech. We may have already fucked up with the forever chemicals, right?
Right.
And then the one that we haven't talked about yet, but it's the one that's nearest to the current event horizon, is our collective sense-making. It just break down, and it seems like it is almost there.
Yeah, you talked about like the need for a $1 trillion idea that you're putting out there. You want someone to work on this. You basically a system of antibodies for mis and malinformation combined with a system for positive collective sense-making. So put that into English for me.
Well, it wasn't English.
Better English.
Okay, so I've been working on building what we call the internet for 44 years. My first job in tech was with a company called The Source, which was the world's first consumer online service. I personally designed our second generation forum system. I personally designed our email system. I personally designed the precursor to blogs, So I've been doing this shit for a long time. And I love that stuff back in the good old days. And for the longest time, I would say that the nets were great positive value to humanity. And they're still of great positive value to humanity. The question is, they are great net positive value to humanity. And I'd say at this point, it's a mighty close call, and it's getting bad rapidly. And so the $1 trillion opportunity is, how do we use technology to build for ourselves personal agents that let in what we want to let in, and including some stuff that we don't specify, because we do want serendipity, right? And you set your serendipity setting. I want 8% really crazy shit, right? And then also lets us go outbound very easily. I mean, I don't travel a lot by design, but I recently did a fairly complicated bit of travel here. That's why I'm here in Austin. Jesus Christ, is it difficult to use these travel systems today? Why can't I just think the thought? Plan my trip for me. And of course, we could actually do that today, almost. It's very close. And so the info agents use the affordances that we already have wired in, plus AI, plus filtering, plus some human curation. I do think there's a human curation component in there, and part of the $1 trillion opportunity are curation workstations for people to be able to be compensated for being curators to feed into the networks. And then to the last part of what you read, I think that was one of my rants on Facebook, I think, wasn't it?
I don't know.
I don't know where you got it from.
Oh, the $1 trillion. No, you tweeted it recently.
Oh, okay. The other key part of it, which makes it go from the $1 billion opportunity to the $1 trillion opportunity, is that each of our info agents develops negotiated sense making with other info agents, right? So your info agent and my info agent, I say, keep an eye on Liv, see if she says anything intelligent, right? And then you say the same thing about me, or maybe you don't say it about me, but it's via somebody else who listens to me. And eventually that pattern of collective sense making is almost automatically curated, so that, and of course it'll never be perfect, right? But in general, you get what you want and what you should have at any given point in time, and almost all the shit will be filtered out. And if we could do that, the shit businesses will eventually just go away, and instead we'll actually have, or it is possible, we'll have a bifurcation, because at least initially you'll have to pay money to have the info agent. And it may be a fair bit of money initially. Right. It could be as much as $100 or $200 a month. And one of the, of course, key rules of at least the Ruttian info agent, no fucking advertising, God damn it, or almost. I do like the idea of being able to personally set a price for an ad, right? Say, if you want to send me an ad, it costs you $10, right? I also think that my wife will report this to be the case. Every time one of the, you go to the doctor and they send you, take this survey, right?
Yeah.
My law is I'm not going to do a goddamn thing unless you pay me $10, right? And each person should be able to set their price, and the guys on the other side will say, all right, it's going to cost me $10 to send a survey to Jim. He may or may not open it. But the statistic will also be published on how often I open them. So, okay, if you pay me the $10, I've taken your survey 83% of the time, so it's probably worth your while to do it.
Wouldn't your info agent just fill it out, or you don't want to use the cycles? Or?
Well, I may or may not, right? It may be.
But it's more about
there could be qualitative questions like, how was the experience at the doctor's office? The info agent can't do that. So, could it? So, like just to make it a bit more specific about what you mean. So, what's currently being designed is more that you're kind of coming into and talking to this AI, or you're going to this other AI to get some like products and services maybe made up, and it's going to have an agent that's going to use. But you're more describing that each person has their personalized and adjustable, etc. Agent that they develop a trust relationship with. I was recently thinking it would be great if I can, and I actually wanted to do it this weekend, but just like fine tune a model on the basis of all of the books that I would like myself to have read, but don't get around to, that my friends, the people that I trust constantly recommend. That's like 500 books a year. I will just not read that, but I could feed it into a fine tuned model. Or even better, why should you do the work when, somebody has created that curation and you subscribe to 2 or 3 curations, right? So you don't have to do all the work. So someone's, say the 3 areas, say you're interested in 5 areas, you can just subscribe to the 5 people that have built those sets. And
because maybe then it becomes kind of closer to the thing that is also problematic with representative democracy, where it's a basket of things. Whereas I basically the question is, how much time can I personally put in to do the selection versus like what's the benefit of it, right?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Because I'm so interested in this $1 trillion opportunity, I've actually built little bits of it for myself. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I am not going to do it, people out there. I am too old, I'm too rich, and I'm too lazy. If I was 45, this is exactly what I would be doing, right? So a team of 45-year-olds and younger, do this. If you want some advice from the old warlord, give me a call, right? This needs to be done. I want it, but I'm not going to do it. So I'm just giving this one to the world. Have at it, people, right? And that's the way it is. I'll give you an example of I've done a couple of these little teeny corners of the $1 trillion opportunity just because I want them. I subscribe to, this is embarrassing to admit, 117 Substacks. Right?
Bloody hell.
I only pay for like 18 of them, but I get 117
What fraction do you read?
I don't know. That's a good question. But to deal with the problem, I created a AI agent that sucks them all in out of my email box, and I trained basically a OpenAI GPT. Well, it's not quite a GPT, it's like a GPT, but using some of my own technology and calls into the OpenAI API, et cetera. And I was able to cheat because I used the transcripts of all the Jim Rutt show as the source material to train this thing on. So it now reads on an average about 75 Substacks a day and ranks them for me in the probability that I would like to read them.
Nice.
Create summaries at 2 levels, a 1-paragraph and a 6-paragraph summary. And just because I could, it also creates an evocative illustration. And so when I'm running this thing, I just come in the morning and it's got already there all the Substacks that have come in so far today, ranked in order by its best guess of my level of interest, a 1-paragraph summary, and if I want to click on that, a 7-paragraph summary, and if I click on that, the whole thing. And oh, by the way, I don't even have to wait for network latency because it's already downloaded the whole thing and has it in memory. So this stuff is operating at local CPU speed, not network speed. Mm-hmm. And how long that took me to develop? About 20 hours.
Can I have it for myself? It sounds amazing.
You need to put out your own podcast and transcribed as well because it's right. Like it's.
Well, there's another way.
I can do that. I've got a podcast. I just need the transcripts.
It's now trivial. Whisper X will make an almost perfect transcript of your audio. There's the one that my producer uses for my podcast is even better because it'll put the names of the people on it. Whisper actually basically just say voice 1, voice 2, et cetera. But yeah, it wouldn't cost much to do a podcast. And it's interesting. I do almost perfect transcripts, high dollar transcripts for my podcast, and have from the very beginning, long before LLMs existed, because I hate podcasts. I hate listening to them. I hardly ever listen to podcasts. And even when guests that I have on have had most of their recent exposure in podcasts, I get those podcasts transcribed, right? I'm a reader. Reading is my thing. Not everybody's that way. Everybody has different modality. And so a fortiori had these great transcripts, and all the LLMs know a shitload about me and Game B and all the crazy shit I'm interested in. It's scary how much they know.
I'm well aware. I used one for researching this. It's very helpful.
I'm pretty sure that the reason they know all this is because of those transcripts.
Right.
Yeah, Tyler Cowen pointed out that his new book he's writing for the AIs rather than for humans. Because
that's very interesting.
If you want to have distribution in the future, it will probably be as more and more communication happens as human talking to AI, you actually want to be part of the essence that the AI carries in itself as it talks to you.
Well, that's a damn interesting idea. I've been meaning to have him on, so that's a good excuse to reach out to him.
Also, Andrej Karpathy made this other separate point which relates to it, which is that, again, same consideration leads to probably you want to make your websites over time become more and more AI readable, which has different preferences, right? It doesn't need images of like high megabytes. You actually would rather have text files and various other things there that are like very easily extractable for the AI.
That speaks into some kind of dead internet theory as well. Although it's not dead internet theory, it's just like AI internet theory.
It's just, I think, potentially, exactly. It's more just changing what the interface of the engagement is. Like, is the human community like just like interfacing with just dead text, or are you just have this other method of? And
You'll just have different layers. You'll have your AI readable layer of your website, and then your human interface.
You want to be able to come back to the base truth, but especially while you have often this false information that is otherwise told to you. But for many use cases, this is great to be able to combine it in this way, I believe. So a topic that is, I think, fortunately coming up now more in people's minds, and Anthropic recently published a podcast about it, and David Chalmers is now working on it, Rob Long, some of the great philosophers of our time, actually, is the topic of AI consciousness, which many people initially have kind of like a reaction that is just like super strong against how dare you even ask the question, right? But you've also looked into this.
A lot.
Yeah.
It's one of my core interests since 2014.
Do you want to make quickly the case why it's an important question that we do need to wrestle with?
There's a whole bunch of reasons. I should, by the way, and we can now announce, I've been advising an institute called the California Institute for Machine Consciousness that's been under wraps for a couple of years. It's now come out of the closet, and check out their website. I don't remember what, I think it's CIMC.ai probably. But Yosha Bach is the chief scientist and executive director, who's a brilliant dude. He's been on my podcast a few times. So anyway, this is something I'm obsessed on. I'm an official advisor to them, and I might even get more involved in that. My interest in machine consciousness in particular is basically has two parts. One, the scientific study of consciousness is famously difficult, right? It's really hard to understand what's going on inside your head, right? And self-reports can help to some degree. We can get secondary evidence like EEGs, et cetera. But there's a limit to what we can do so fast. And the imaging technologies are getting better, but not that rapidly. Understanding the dynamic, we haven't even mapped the networks yet, let alone their full dynamics. So there's a long way to go on being able to understand animal consciousness in a skull, basically.
Well, but also because not all theories would even presuppose that you would find the core of consciousness by looking at it through imaging. Right? Like we don't have a agreed upon expert consensus theory of what is the best theory of consciousness.
Yeah, even in the materialistic realm, where we say that it is certainly an emergent phenomena of neurons, Exactly how that happens, we don't know. And we don't even know how much electrical fields are involved. So much shit we don't know, right? And you can't do fine-grained experiments on living animals, et cetera. So my initial interest was, I've always been interested, since 1998, I've been interested in the science of consciousness, and I've read everything. I've had most of the leading people on my podcast. I've read most of their books, hundreds of papers. It's a domain that I've gone extremely deep in, but I can see that our progress is gated by this difficulty of that the interesting stuff is almost impossible to tweeze apart. If you could create a machine consciousness, then you'd have no problem metering the hell out of it, right? Okay, how did it do its consciousness thing, right? And let's make this change. Let's put this Bernays propaganda into its head and see what happens, right? What is the actual bit rate between perception and consciousness? There's a lot of controversy about that. Our perception rates in the millions, tens of millions of bits per second. It's thought that the rate of change in our consciousness is on the order of 50 bits per second. But those are guesses.
Sounds like you're potentially pointing at a different thing than what like David Chalmers would describe as the hard problem of consciousness.
Well, of course, this is one of the key questions, and the Ruttian position is that there probably isn't a hard problem of consciousness.
That's my position as well.
And that...
Wow, you found a friend finally on this.
No. There are quite a few.
Lots of few.
Daniel Dennett is
Neil Seth is another.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who have sensible views on consciousness. All the rest of them are morons. No, not true. And
especially Chalmers is quite
just
quite a
quickly
genius.
for anyone who doesn't know it, can someone define the hard problem quickly?
So, you go ahead.
The hard problem of consciousness is that, let's call it the ineffable aspect of experience. The classic example is the blue of that sofa over there, the actual feeling and the sense. Was it purple? Oh, I'm a guy, right? We only got 3 colors, right? We got blue, green, and yellow. So it's blue or purple or whatever it is, it is. But there's something in my brain that feels, it has all kinds of side effects, because this reminds me of a French gay whorehouse or something, right? And all those things are all coexistent with the actual feeling of the blueness. That's called qualia. And so what is the nature of qualia is fundamentally the hard problem of consciousness.
Which is, on the other side, basically the easy problem of consciousness is how do you see blue in the first place?
Yes. Right.
Like what happens in your brain, which is also interesting, and that's what you definitely find out with imaging. That's why it's the easy problem. It's pretty hard, but then it's like what its likeness, some would say.
Okay.
The famous book, paper that was started.
Tom Nagel.
Tom Nagel, what's it like to be a bat or something?
Yeah, what's it like to be a bat, which is his very brilliant insight that bats have echolocation, we don't. So the consciousness of a bat, the qualia of the bat,
must be very different.
Must be just like, we can't even imagine what it's like, right?
So you guys claim that it doesn't exist?
No.
As a problem?
As a problem.
I think it's a question. So it's. I have a bad explanation of why, but so there, as science progresses, you sometimes notice that phrenology was stupid. And you just like discard it, and it's explained by other means, right?
Elan Vital's the other example, the idea that life was some
vital
magical
essence.
thing.
Yeah.
Vital essence.
And so it's a question that one always, many ask themselves, and I ask myself, is like, what are the today's sciences that we will in 50, 100 years look back on and say that has been better explained by something else? A candidate for that is something that involves the best explanation of what the hard problem is like what its likeness.
Right.
It's like, that sounds a little like we might be talking about some BS. Maybe there is a better functionalist theory that would describe the specific dynamic that leads to the perception of there being a what its likeness. It might be
I
just
go one step further than that, which is the machinery. Once we understand it, it'll become obvious that a machine, it's not actually a machine, but a device that operates in this fashion will produce the effect of that. Right?
Yes.
And here's my stupid example. As kids, we used to have these flip books. They were like cartoons.
Right, you flip through them and you see an animation.
I still remember the first one I saw was in 2nd grade. It was a guy rowing a rowboat across a lake. And so this isn't a perfect analogy, but it's fairly close, is that we're going to discover that we're the guy writing the rowboat and we're writing the book at the same time. And that's just the way it is. That's how Ma Nature happened to evolve the machinery of our brain. Turns out consciousness is quite expensive, both energetically and in genetic information. So it's certainly paying its bills, right? Nature would not have had consciousness for probably 200 million years at least if it didn't have a payoff in terms of inclusive fitness.
But one point about it is also why it's also good to mention the Nagel, what it's like to be a bat is, like we are both very close, it seems, to like the functionalist theories more than some of the other ones. That said, it's still not settled, right? Like I would only be significantly, but not extremely surprised if it turned out to be completely different.
Exactly, and that's what the beauty of science is.
That's why I think the way to look at machine consciousness is asking oneself the question: given this theory of consciousness, can it be? Given this theory of consciousness, could there be machine consciousness? And it's not clear, right?
Well, and that's why we need to try to build one, right? Because if we can, based on premise A, then that indicates that premise A is at least somewhat representational of conscious. Now, here's the other very important move, and most people are so confused about this. I'm going to try to say it slowly. This is from John Searle, the Berkeley philosopher of consciousness and also other things. He likes to say that consciousness is like digestion. There is no, you can't put a finger, oh, that's your digestion, right? It's an ensemble of things going on, your throat, your tongue, your teeth, your esophagus, the appendix, the small intestine, and then the Rutt corollary is, and then it comes out the end, same as your consciousness. Shit, right? And then he goes further, and I've just stole this and run with it. In the chemical, pharmaceutical, and food industries, they have devices called digesters. And basically, you put in rough raw materials and bacteria or yeast and acid, and reactions occur, and more valuable chemicals come out the other end. And they're called digesters. But they're not at all functionally like human digestion, but they produce an analogous result via roughly analogous means. Rough chemistry, acid, microorganisms, heat, time equals more valuable product. And so I have to keep reminding people that when we create the early machine consciousness, they're not going to be just like Shakespeare, right? They're going to be analogous. The machine consciousnesses will be as analogous to Shakespeare as the digesters in the pharmaceutical industry are to your digestion. And so don't expect them to be exactly like us. They won't be. In fact, that's actually the fun part, because the design space of consciousness is probably gigantic, or things that we could reasonably call consciousness. And ours just happens to be one particular kind of constrained definition that could pay its bills to Mother Nature over evolutionary time.
I think that's a really important point, because the thing that I've been throwing back at people sometimes is that say, oh, when you claim that machines can have consciousness, I'm not saying that the current ones do, but if you say that they might, you're just anthropomorphizing onto like your kind of assumptions onto them. It's like, I think it's actually the inverse. You're anthropomorphizing the concept of, not you personally, but others are anthropomorphizing the concept of consciousness. There are many other consciousnesses to be had outside of the human one.
And oh, by the way,
like the bat, for example.
And there's one even more radical on Earth, probably. The large cephalopods, the big squids and octopi.
Right.
They developed what appears to be something like consciousness, but very radically different, because they have 8 brains or 10 brains rather than 1, but those brains talk to each other. And they are unrelated. The neural systems are unrelated. And so we may have a very alien consciousness here on Earth. And machine consciousnesses will be more alien than that, and that's okay. So that's number one. I want to be able to have substrates to work on theories of what actually is the man in the rowboat in the flip book. How does that actually work to produce something that people would recognize as consciousness? But the other one, this comes from, frankly, my Game B work. A lot of people in and around these Game B adjacent communities full of more blather and bullshit about consciousness than about any other topic, right? And, the cosmic consciousness, all this horse shit, right? And so I think that at least as important as advancing the science of consciousness is de-blathering the discourse of consciousness. And the more we can actually say in firm ways that we can demonstrate and not just talk about, that this is what we know about consciousness right now, and go interact with this thing. You tell me what you think, if it's conscious or not, right? Here's voluminous experiments that have been done on this thing. And oh, by the way, this is exactly how it works. Here's the source code, right? And when people see that, they're going to realize, I think, I could be wrong on this. Again, as you said, this is an area we could all be wrong. Maybe there is a cosmic consciousness. Maybe Santa Claus exists. Who the fuck knows, right? But deblatherizing the insane discourse of consciousness that's very large in our liminal communities itself is hugely important and valuable.
I like that as a take of why it's important to figure out these questions. I thought we're going to go down to what you've said before, which I like a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, the value is like we're building these new, whether you call them technologies or life forms or whatever, but potentially by the trillions, these digital potential sentiences, and either we don't give them sufficient moral valence when they have it, which would be devastating. So it's like replicate all the horrors we've got of factory farming currently, but then like scaled up massively on many orders of magnitude larger and potentially even more suffering capabilities. Or we do falsely give them moral valence at our own personal cost. We cede our rights to the machines because there's many more of them, or they
they're smarter.
have stronger preferences and they're smarter and blah, blah, blah. And when they don't deserve it, and in either direction, it's a huge thing to fuck up. So it's unbelievably high stakes. But that is a very funny additional point that also it would be nice. Because, you're right. The term consciousness is used as this like term of convenience almost to just like fit into people's own moral views. I actually happen to be someone who believes that there are, like, I do think that ecosystems have a form of consciousness, for example. Like, I do think that shit's going on in the Amazon rainforest. Like, I think that I wouldn't be surprised if there's a form of consciousness
there. We need to figure out this answer quicker so that she can stop talking.
I see your eyes glazing over.
I want to make a very important point on this, which I'll be interested to see your reaction to. And this is, again, one of the great confusions of the discourse around consciousness. People get consciousness and intelligence confused all the time.
Sure.
A bacteria is intelligent, right? A bacteria will steer towards sugar and away from acid or hot water, right? The Amazon is certainly intelligent, right? It's a very complex adaptive system that confronts collective problems, and through the what the hell's the name of the fungal networks? The mycelium networks and other methods, and also through evolutionary time, et cetera, solves problems. It's intelligent. But at least the John Searle model that consciousness is a specific architecture that produces a specific kind, a class, wide class, because it can include tadpoles and bats, but it doesn't include rocks and 2x4s. Would say that if you use that version of the definition of consciousness, the Amazon is intelligent, but not consciousness, not conscious.
Sure. But I mean, you've referenced like the concept of egregores earlier in the conversation,
yes.
right?
And they're not conscious. It's very important.
They're not?
They're absolutely not. In fact, this is one of the very first times I was exposed to the idea. Brett Weinstein was one of the first founders of Game B, right? And he introduced a concept he called Goliath, which was sort of the Game A egregore. And he presented it as if it was conscious. We had like a 3-hour group discussion where at the end of it, he stood down and said, "You're right, they're not conscious." And this is very interesting and important, that we can have complex adaptive systems that seem to have trajectories without any consciousness.
So they're kind of like zombies,
philosophical. They're essentially zombies.
Right, I mean, which would imply that it does. So, and then by that extension, are you saying that therefore it doesn't have any moral value?
It has implicit moral value.
Because it impacts other conscious agents?
What other conscious agents
right.
read.
It's not in itself.
It doesn't wake up in the morning and say, "I'm going to be a game motherfucker." It just is a game
But again, do you know that? How do you differentiate an egregore or an ecosystem that is intelligent, that it is adapting, it has like these hyperdimensional sort of things that it can be affected by and respond to? Again, like that's why the confidence that is not conscious?
Well, this depends on how you define consciousness. And in a very simplistic way, I would describe at least the tetrapod branch of consciousness. That's the one that comes up through reptiles, amphibians, and eventually us and birds. Is organized around a unification of the senses in a coherent, smooth scene, right? The fact that you're looking at us, we're experiencing this, you're feeling the rumble in your belly, you feel your toe is a little bad, you hear that slight buzz over there from the air conditioning unit. That is your conscious scene. That requires a shitload of neural support to create that thing. It's very expensive. And if you don't have that, it ain't consciousness of the tetrapoidal variety. And I will guarantee you a tree doesn't have that kind of thing because it can't fight, it doesn't have the right kind of network architecture. I guarantee you the Amazon doesn't have a thing like that, doesn't have the right network architecture. So I can say quite firmly that it doesn't have consciousness as we apply it to the animals that we know. But it has intelligence. And people get so confused by the difference because that thing is so intelligent. How could it not be conscious? And this is important to know about AIs also.
They're a great example of that.
The conversation Yosha and I, some other people had start in 2014 is consciousness a shortcut to AGI? And we're not sure. And one of the reasons that the California Institute of Machine Consciousness is going to work on these problems is maybe it is a shortcut to AGI. I'm not sure. I don't even have a strong opinion about it one way or the other, but I am reasonably sure that we can create AGIs without consciousness. And we can probably even create ASIs without consciousness, and maybe we should.
I think part of also why there is a natural impulse to ascribe consciousness to these like big systems is that in some way, in living things at least, there is at least a correlation, but certainly not a causation of how complex and how many neurons there are in a brain with how likely one would be to find consciousness within it. There's certainly a correlation because it just, at least like according to like various functional theories and like the question that you posed or the point that it is expensive to develop it, so evolution wouldn't have done it initially. It would have done at the point when you can afford it and you already have satisfied various other needs.
And you're getting a win in every generation.
Yeah. Right? So you don't expect like muscles to have consciousness, for example. They're just like their neurons are just too few.
They're not organized the right way.
And they're not organized like that. Yeah. So, but yeah, there is basically, but we do assume that at the point of some neocortex and like just like various complex systems that a brain has, you can expect there may be an organization that satisfies the thing that we at least would describe as consciousness, which is related very closely to attention or perception or something like this.
Well, in fact, the way I use it is that this animal consciousness of the sort that involves a conscious scene, the actual consciousness is attention, is the cursor of consciousness, that we're seeing a new conscious scene about every 25 milliseconds, 40 times a second, plus or minus, coarse graining. You can switch attention at about once every 6 frames. Most people don't. And the brain says switch attention or don't switch attention about once every 250 milliseconds. And the creation of the frame and then us walking through what object has attention is actually what consciousness is.
Which one do you ascribe most to it? It sounds like close to attention schema theory as well.
I'm not sure I know what attention schema theory is.
That's
it is that. That's what he described is almost exactly that. Let's not get into that.
I'm going to read up on that.
You'll love it. It's Michael Graziano. Have you heard that?
Yeah, certainly.
It's almost exactly what you described.
So, but in any case, it's probably worth saying, even though Jim and I speak to it with kind of like, it's definitely not that, and we feel like it's this. It is still the case that we don't currently know. And we don't know with AIs, and you've said, well, why I think it matters. And I think the thing that we would find insufficient is if the argument of why AIs don't have consciousness was simply because they're on a different substrate, because they're carbon-based, silicon-based, whereas we're more carbon-based. I don't like that as an argument.
Yeah, I think Searle kind of demolishes that, right? So long as you understand we're talking about comparison, machine consciousness by analogy and not by congruence, right? In the same way the digesters in the food industry, they do different things. They're made out of different materials, made out of aluminum typically, and they have they use yeast instead of bacteria, but it's still digestion, right? And as long as we understand that that's what we're talking about with computer or machine consciousness, then it starts to boggle credulity to say that you couldn't do it just because it's silicon. Unless we're all wrong and there is a cosmic consciousness that permeates the universe that only biology can tune into. It's possible. I would bet large amounts against it, but at this stage of our knowledge, it's a hell of a lot more than it was 40 years ago, but it's still very incomplete.
So I think we'll invite guests on like Chalmers also to discuss that further, because we have to wrap up. But like I want to just extend on your point that you said before, that it's actually even more important that people think about it, because I think undoubtedly over the next years, more and more people will actually ascribe consciousness and moral relevance to AI models. Like
they already are.
People already did that. You had Lemoyne, etc. But and children have like a high propensity to just like do it with dolls and everything.
That's very
right?
dangerous. Very dangerous.
Yeah. And this could just be really, really bad. And I think we should have a confident-ish, at least, answer to, no, this is wrong, or it is there.
Right.
Daniel Dennett laid out an essay, I think it may have been even in the New York Times, a very high profile, where he suggested that it should be a felony for anyone to create a AI that was able to convinced people that it was human, and that should actually be a very serious criminal violation. Not quite up to the level of the Butlerian jihad, but close.
But it feels crime against humanity adjacent.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah, I completely agree, because you're
I
like
would be okay with that. So in other words, and think about operationalizing it, you could require a chat bot every 90 seconds to say, I'm not a human. I'm a machine.
Just a reminder, I'm not a human. I am a machine. Exactly. You don't know.
And I was designed probably by
you don't need to be mean to me, but
probably evil game A motherfucker designed me to extract the nickels out of your pocket, right? That's what I would require it to say, but probably won't say that. But that's a very, very important point, because without some discernment about these things, we could be really sucked into a bad place. I mean, Eliza, the famous AI therapist, it was like 1,000 lines of code or something. Graduate students became addicted to it in the late 60s, that emulated a Rogerian therapist. And I don't think they ascribed consciousness to it, but they reacted to it as if it were a person.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're seeing, and even worse, they're now hijacking, the male sex drive, which is like, good luck. Any young man resisting the temptation of like these. You've already got the OnlyFans model, which is, again, bringing us back full circle. It's all about dopamine hijacking.
Right.
But it's AI, it's not even real humans at this point. It's not AI tech. It's not a human writing the text. The images of these girls are increasingly just going to become AI generated. They're not even real women that they're looking at. And these companies are making, it's set up so easily for men to just donate. Take your top off, take your this off, whatever, do this.
Yeah, rats hitting the bar for more cocaine.
It's the ultimate rat heroin thing. So if they had to constantly keep saying, if we make it a crime to have a misleading this, you are not speaking to a real human being right now. That it might be like the last assemblage of keeping a human in the loop.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. There's something about those AI girlfriends that creep me out at like an extremely high level of creeped outedness.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's something to, again, like if you've got the sort of, as you said, the deepest, darkest incel who can't go out and find any companionship anywhere anyway, sure. If that gives someone some meaning and a sense of companionship, I'm all for it. But it's more like, again, it's not like it's just going to be them that get sucked into this. As these become more and more effective, and we forget what it was once like to actually really interface with real humans, and especially across generations, we're just going to get more and more detached from like no one will know how to interface with humans anymore. So yeah, it's quite the slippery slope.
Let's not do that.
No, let's not do that.
But we will, unless we don't. Unless we consciously choose not to.
Okay, so to finish up, we like to do this with our guests.
Okay.
A series of rapid fire predictions. I want you to be as system one here as possible. So like just whatever your intuition is.
Okay. And you're going to ask me questions and I'm going to fire off.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And just give you a numerical, your probability.
Okay.
Okay. Probability that you go back to using a flip phone in the next 2 years.
30%.
Probability that the concept of cognitive sovereignty becomes a mainstream topic of public discourse similar to the concept of privacy today by 2030.
20%.
Probability that you break your social media 6-month sabbatical this year.
20%.
Probability that the dominant global economic model shifts significantly away from GDP growth as the primary measure of national success by 2050.
50-50.
That's confident. I like it. Probability that Game B adjacent design principles are explicitly referenced in governance documents of at least 100 significant DAOs or intentional communities by 2030.
30%.
Probability that a Game B proto-community of 1,000 people exists by 2030.
80%.
Ooh, confident. Probability that Game B proto-community of 1 million people exists by 2040.
Run the math. Million, 30% also.
Okay. Probability that you personally will live full-time in a proto Game B community for at least 1 year by 2035.
50-50.
Probability that the leading current AI models are conscious.
0.
Probability that one of the functionalist-ish materialist theories is accurate about as a description of consciousness.
80%.
Probability of AGI by 2030.
40%.
And by 2040?
98%.
Okay. Probability that the hard problem turns out to be false.
80%.
Awesome. Thank you. Just to finish up, what's the most win-winny thing that you can point our audience towards as a takeaway from this conversation that you would like them to go and do?
To actually do? When you there's a simple one. When you think about liking or retweeting or sharing something, stop and think. Is this good? Take an omniconsiderate view. Is this good for all the above, yourself, the people who will receive this signal, and the human race? And if the answer isn't yes to all three of them, don't do it.
Love it. Where can people find you? Where do you want to steer them to, especially while you're on your social media sabbatical?
You can get me at, you can send me DMs on Facebook or Twitter. I do log in once a week when I'm on sabbatical to collect my messages. You can also hit me at jimruttshow.com.
I highly recommend it. It's a great show. And if people want to get involved in Game B?
Go to the Facebook group on the Game B Facebook group.
Awesome.
And if you want to do some reading, go to gameb.wiki and you can read some somewhat older materials, but still some fascinating stuff.
I'll include a bunch of these links in the show notes as well. Jim, thank you so much for coming on.
It's been amazingly good time well spent. Lots of fun. Giving me a few things to think about.
No, thank you. Well, thank you for coming on Win-Win. That's the goal.
All right.
Win-win.
Win-win. That was great.
Thanks, Jim.
I think that was the best podcast appearance I've ever done.